Sound. Committee Room 30. 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 Sound.
Broadcast online and throughout Parliament buildings, and anyone watching online. So just a wee reminder to mute your phones and that no recording or photography is allowed. Okay, so members, if you're content, we're going to proceed with the agenda. So we have apologies today from Harry and from Carol, and I think we're still waiting for Podrick to join online and also for Claire to arrive. So, but I think we're quorum because we've time. Okay, so do members have any interest to declare in relation to the meeting? No? Okay. Okay, so Chairperson's business, I'm just going to take a slightly different slant to this today. Just want to make comment on the Legacy and Reconciliation Act that came into force today, therefore bringing an end to 35 inquests and blocking any more from proceeding. Very conscious that a lot of the witnesses we've already engaged with around victims and survivors and their families will be devastated by this. Read some of the comments from the Shadow Secretary of State today around his plans, possibly if he gets into government, around repeal or otherwise of the Act, but I think some of it was quite contradictory. And so I'm proposing, members, that we will invite representatives from the Independent Commission for research and information recovery to committee before the end of this session, before the summer. Are we all in agreement with that? Yeah. Okay, so the next issue I just want to draw reference to is the start of the COVID inquiry evidence sessions in Belfast this week, and again we've heard some very unedifying evidence already emerging. We will be following that up in due course with the TO around their civil contingencies preparation. And then lastly, I think that it's worth drawing reference to the diplomatic spat between the Irish and UK governments in relation to the potential return of asylum seekers from the Republic to the UK. So I think it's very fitting that our session today is actually looking at what we can do with the devolved powers and responsibilities we have here in Northern Ireland. Does anybody want to comment on that before we move forward, or go ahead?
I don't know if it's maybe more appropriate to bring this up during matters arising, but there were just two things I wanted to raise. The comments that had been made last week regarding they'll get their money in terms of the victims and survivors. I just wanted to see if we could get an update on whether or not you'd written to the DALO, if there was any response to that.
I've spoken to the DALO on that, yes.
Okay. And then the other thing, I don't know how other members feel about this, but I wondered if, as a committee, we could send our solidarity to the new mayor in Derry Strabane, following the abuse that she's received. And obviously we'll be familiar with Lillian Zenoibar and her work as part of the North West Migrants Forum, and I know we have some representatives of that organisation here today, so I think it would be appropriate that we send solidarity to her from the committee.
Okay, I will certainly second that, but I would also like to do something similar for the new alliance, incoming alliance. Lord Mayor, apparently he's been he's been getting a lot of homophobic abuse. I think he got a lot of wishes, but he got a lot of abuse as well, probably in equal measure. So I think if we can send our solidarity, it's great to see that there's that diversity. But
yeah, absolutely, I'll second that.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Okay, members, just moving on. So in terms of draft minutes, just draw your attention to pages 7 to 12 of the meeting pack for the meeting of last week, 24th of April. Are you all content with the minutes? Yeah. Any matters arising? Okay, I'll go ahead and sign those then. Okay, so in terms of moving forward, in terms of our priorities, I just would seek your agreement for the clerk to schedule sessions for the following before summer recess. As I say, we've talked about that one around the Independent Commission, but also then one on international relations, strategic investment and identity and language off the back of the sort of FICT conversation yesterday. Content? Okay, so members, on page 20 of the there's a clerk's brief, and on page 22 there's the draft response to the Lord's Constitution Committee inquiry on the governance of the Union. Is everyone content with that drafted response? I think it was pretty much reflected what we said. Yeah. Okay. Maybe give you, if maybe by the end of today, if there's any comments, if people haven't had a chance to read it. No, some of us have been back-to-back meetings. Okay, members, we're going to move on. Welcome, Claire. We're going to move on to our substantive, the substantive part of our meeting today. So we're going to take a departmental briefing on refugee and asylum support. So the clerk's brief is on page 25. Okay. Oh, you're in the room. That's good. I wasn't sure whether you were in the room or whether you had to be brought in. Okay, so while you're just taking your seats, I'll just advise that Orla McStravick is here. So she's the Director of Refugee and Asylum Support and Integration Division within the Executive Office. Jonathan McNaught, who is also in that division, and Julie Cumming as well. So before you start, I just wanted to raise concerns that were expressed by some of our members, and certainly I echo them in terms of the lateness of the papers. And I would appreciate if you could start by just giving a bit of an explanation as to why they arrived at 11:15 today. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair, and apologies. We had hoped the paper would have been with members earlier. It's just gone through the departmental clearing process, took slightly longer than anticipated, so apologies that the short notice that it was received at. Hopefully members have had an opportunity to at least have a look at it, and we'll cover some of the detail in the opening remarks as well, if that's helpful.
Okay, two things before you go on. Could you speak up a little bit?
Yeah.
And also, we have had a chance to read them even though they were late, so you don't necessarily need to read every part of it. We'd just like to get to questions. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Orla.
Okay, well, good afternoon. I'd like to thank the committee for the opportunity to provide a briefing on the work of the Refugee and Asylum Support and Integration Division. As you've said, with me today is Johnny McNaught and Julie Cummings. Julie heads up our policy team, and Johnny the operation team within the division. So I appreciate it's short notice, but members have received a briefing paper which hopefully gives a bit of background to and purpose of the division, and it should give some flavour of the key work areas and importantly how we're working to develop and deliver a refugee integration strategy. So if helpful, I'll introduce work in a little more detail, but with a view to leaving much of today's session for discussion and questions. So where we live should be a place of sanctuary for those that are fleeing persecution. In line with our wider racial equality and TBUC strategies, we aim to welcome those from different cultures, backgrounds and ethnicities and support their successful integration. We believe that migration supported by sound integration has the potential to enhance our economy, society and wider culture for the benefit of our communities. We recognise immigration policy is not devolved, and as such we can't take decisions on routes of arrivals or issues which remain the responsibility of Westminster departments. That said, we do appreciate that integration support and key services, including things like health and education, are devolved, and there is a need to ensure a joined-up approach to facilitate access to support and services in a timely and efficient way. This is not without challenge given the significantly changed landscape, and we continue to engage with Home Office to represent our needs and issues and to encourage that these are reflected in policy schemes and funding provision. So the division was established partly in response to the change in landscape and the quantum of arrivals and needs, and as learning following the needs for a fast-paced coordinated response to the Ukraine crisis locally. The Executive has traditionally responded positively to calls to support those displaced by global conflict, welcoming over 1,800 Syrian refugees and committing to welcome over 800 Afghan arrivals, and most recently with our response in respect of Ukraine. The essential multi-agency approach highlighted the benefits of bringing together coordination of operation and policy responsibilities within one department. Whilst this doesn't detract from individual departments' responsibilities, it does allow us the opportunity to look at cross-cutting issues and seek to develop better approaches to meet the needs and adopt and embed learning and best practice where at all possible. Furthermore, the need to maintain and experience an agile resource that could respond effectively and quickly to any future needs has been borne out. So whilst the division is still relatively new, I do believe we have made progress, although we recognise there's still more to do. We continue to play our part in supporting Ukrainians fleeing the war with over 3,200 arrivals so far. We've paid more than 640,000 in immediate cash support to those arrivals and have facilitated payments of over 3.5 million to more than 930 individual sponsors under the Homes for Ukraine scheme. We've also recently assumed responsibility for supporting the British nationals overseas visa holders that are currently here, and we've commissioned research to engage with the local BNO community and assess their needs. We expect the initial findings of this research to be available later this month. Local delivery of the Syrian Vulnerable Persons Resettlement Scheme, the Afghan Citizens Resettlement Scheme and the Afghan Relocation and Assistance Policy has previously been the responsibility for the Department for Communities, and it moved to TEO on the 1st of April 2024, so just in recent weeks there. We will continue to liaise with the Home Office and other stakeholders to influence policy and the approach to development of any future schemes which may arise. One of the key elements of our work is the development of the refugee integration strategy and coordinating its delivery. Indeed, we've sought to align any work to date under the draft strategy and its outcomes, which were welcomed during the public consultation process. Along with analysis of the public consultation, our latest version, which we anticipate ministers will bring to the Executive in the coming months, has been informed through research on the experiences of refugees living here, and we've also sought to learn from experience provided in the Refugee and Asylum Forum's Priority for Actions paper. We've been collaborating with colleagues in departments and other stakeholders to develop draft thematic delivery plans, so it's clear how we will seek to achieve the outcomes and visions of the strategy. The draft plans currently focus on engagement and inclusion, education and training, housing, pathways out of destitution, pathways to citizenship, English for speakers of other languages, employability, welfare and volunteering, and healthcare. In terms of oversight of the division's work, we have established the following groups as part of our governance structures: the Strategic Planning Group on Refugees and Asylum Seekers, a Tactical Delivery Group, which is more operational in focus, a Voluntary and Community Sector Forum, and a Council Engagement Group. Underpinning all of this, we recognise that we are operating within a rapidly changing legislative and operational environment. As members will be aware, the Home Office approach to immigration has been at the forefront of national politics and discourse for some time. This has resulted in a suite of changes nationally that have a significant impact in the devolved space. Challenging devolved impacts have arisen as a result of the Home Office committing to clear the asylum backlog and to stop small boats crossing in the Channel. Since streamlined asylum processing was introduced last year, there has been a threefold rise in people being granted refugee status month on month. Whilst we welcome that people are getting their asylum decisions more quickly, this increase in the volume and pace has caused challenges within the devolved area of responsibility as we try to support those leaving the asylum estate to settle permanently here. Many refugees who get a positive decision rely on support from the Housing Executive for accommodation, and the increase in numbers have placed strain on that housing system. This has in turn put pressures on the ability to ensure health and education provision as people are moved to temporary accommodation while a suitable permanent home is sought. The issues arising as a result of the move-ons has been recognised, and work is being led via the strategic structures to coordinate a response. We lead a multi-agency move-on coordination group which meets fortnightly, and it's to support shared situational awareness, identification of priorities, and work together to effect solutions where at all possible. The Illegal Migration Act, which received royal assent in July of last year, completely rewrites the immigration policy, although most of its provisions are yet to be commenced. The main provisions include designating anyone who arrives here through a third safe country as inadmissible and placing a duty to remove them from the country. We and indeed other officials are awaiting the detail of how the Act might be operationalised, as it will potentially have an impact on how we meet our own responsibilities towards this cohort, including commitments under the Refugee Integration Strategy. TEO lead a task and finish group to scope the potential devolved impact of the Illegal Migration Act and enable collaborative working in this regard. I could go into much more detail on the areas of work, but I'm keen to ensure we have time for discussion and questions. I hope this gives a flavour of our key work areas to inform that discussion, and we're very happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
No, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Orla, and really appreciate the brevity of your opening remarks. I suppose there is concern that we haven't seen the integration strategy as yet, and I suppose there's concern within the sector that there was a commitment back in 2005 and nearly 20 years on still hasn't come. But I do appreciate that you said that you're working on the auspices of the draft strategy, so I just wanted to pick up on some of that work. So you talked about the Regional Immigration Advice Service, and again there's concern within the sector that what's available on NI Direct, for example, is maybe doesn't go far enough in terms of providing all the information. So if you could speak a wee bit more to that. You talked about the task and finish group there in terms of potential impact from the Illegal Migration Act, and I'm just wondering, could you speak to that, and also how you feel that the Rwanda bill will also impact on the work of that group. And then the last bit in that space is around the visa restrictions on people who have refugee status here, or right to stay, in terms of the sort of movement within the common travel area, and whether there's any work in that space around giving people those freedoms that others enjoy.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the strategy we've touched on, and your particular question in and around NI Direct and the immigration advice. So just on the immigration advice piece, part of the response to Ukraine through the Ukraine Assistance Centres was immigration advice for Ukrainians who arrived here, and what we found was that there was a massive need with the changes in the asylum system and the legislation and the processes. We equally recognised that there was a need across other cohorts as well. So TEO have actually funded regional immigration advice, which would build on what was done for Ukraine but be open to all cohorts of asylum seekers. So that has been in place, I think, since January, and it was extended through the first part of this year. We're obviously subject to budgets. We'd hope to extend that further as well, so that anybody, regardless of route of arrival, can access that immigration advice. Now, that is not to say that they will have a solicitor who will take their asylum claim, but it will be somebody to help them understand the system, and some sort of small casework pieces, etc., would be included with that. So we have funded Law Centre NI to actually take that service forward. On your point about NI Direct, we are actually looking around the comms and all of this NI Direct. We had quite a lot of information up there in the Ukraine context that we're actually wanting to widen out, so that anybody who arrives here will have access to information. In parallel, we have procured a piece of work for orientation, which would provide an orientation package. So for people who are arriving here, they could have easy access to signposting to key services and understand information, given that they're coming to a new country and won't know all the information that they may need to have to hand. So those are two key pieces of work that the TEO have supported and funded under the auspice of the draft strategy. Your second point
was around the task and finish group, around
the task and finish group. So Julie may well come in on this as well, but the task and finish group was set up initially to look at the IMA and what that would mean in terms of the local context. So other departments are represented on that. So it's twofold. First of all, so that they understand what the IMA is, what it means, and any impact that it may have locally in terms of their own departmental responsibilities, local legislation, etc. What we are now looking at, obviously we don't know exactly how the IMA is going to be fully enacted here until the other clauses are taken forward, but we are looking at scenario planning in terms of what are the likely options, what could happen, and what would that mean locally, and what can we do as best as we can to prepare for that. So that's the key stage, I think, that the task and finish group is at this point in time. There was also an audit of legislation that was taken forward across departments, so we could see which legislation may or may not be impacted, depending on what happens with the IMA in the longer term.
Okay, and then there's just a quick one there around visa restrictions across the island.
Visas is not a devolved matter. That is a Home Office issue. We have no role in terms of immigration policy, immigration rules. It has been raised from time to time in terms of transition of this position.
Just another issue. So when was it responsible for the distribution of the Home Office dispersal funds, and then just to councils, and I'm just wondering how you are mapping, measuring, evaluating that, because I'm very conscious that sometimes money goes into councils and can get eaten up very quickly before it actually hits the ground. So I'm just wondering how you are assured that that's actually being as effective as possible.
Yeah, we have an MOU in place with each of the councils. So all of the councils were allocated an element of funding from the Home Office Full Dispersal Fund, and the primary focus of that was trying to build capacity and resource locally, so that when asylum seekers were dispersed in areas beyond Belfast and within Belfast, that they had that additional support. So the councils have provided an overview of what they're using that money for. Some of it is for voluntary community sector organisations to deliver services, and they report to us, I think it's quarterly, on what they're delivering in terms of the funding that we have provided, and in turn then we will provide information up to our strategic planning group around the use of funds across the board that we receive from Home Office and how they're being utilised. So the MOU that's in place allows for that monitoring of how that funding is being used.
Yeah, I mean, just to add that, if it's okay, Chair, I mean, that's a sort of formal structure that Orla has outlined, but of course there is, day-to-day informal engagement with council representatives at staff official level, and we have a council engagement group as part of our governance structures as well, where we will continually chat with, say, the officers around, or the officials around what they're doing in their area, and hopefully sharing best practice, so that at some point down the line we can try and build some sort of, not necessarily a standard approach to council provision, but certainly one that's well informed by learning from best practice.
Thank you. Just a very, very quick one then. In terms of then the Minority Ethnic Development Fund, and I suppose there would be a lot in the sector would say that the rates are not going up and there's not enough money going in comparison to the increase in demand for their services. Do you want to comment on that?
Minority Ethnic Development Fund actually doesn't sit under my area. It sits under Ricky Irwin, and I think he's probably due to give a briefing at some point in time. Now I can take it away and ask for information to be provided, if you want. I just wouldn't have the information to hand on that fund because it sits slightly outside my area of responsibility.
But I just think there's just such an overlap for the organisations that are working with asylum seekers that are, anyway, in receipt of that fund. I'll move on. Deputy Chair Connie, please. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for coming in today and briefing us. I think if we just go back, you'd mentioned there's a number of groups within the department that focus on different areas of delivery for integration of refugees and asylum seekers, and something I'm really concerned about is the experience of children, especially navigating the asylum process and the impact that has on them as a particularly vulnerable group. So I was wondering if there's any sort of mechanism that you have as a department to ensure coordination to deliver for children in cases of housing, their education and their healthcare. And I'm sure we all hear stories come through our constituency offices of children who their families have been placed in hotels, and they then have to try and get settled into a new school, and then they maybe move to temporary accommodation further away. They have to change schools again, and then maybe they get their their application processed, and then they get housed somewhere else, and that is hugely disruptive on children, especially in those formative years. So I'm wondering if you could maybe explain a bit more about the work you do to ensure that children are being delivered for.
I mean, in the context of contingency accommodation, the impact on families and children in particular was raised as a concern with us. So we did actually set up a contingency accommodation group under the auspice of our strategic planning group. Now, some of the issues we have no control over where they're not devolved, but where it is things like education and health that are being impacted, we had the other departments involved in that subgroup as well, and we developed an action plan of things that we could actually do in that space. Equally, we recognise that, with the move-on process and the pace of move-ons, you're quite right, people are moving through that and then moving into, different accommodation through the housing executive when they get their refugee status. So Julie actually chairs a move-on coordination group as well. So again, we have housing executive, health colleagues all around the table on that particular issue to look at a couple of things, but some things that we can do practically around information sharing and data sharing to make sure that, all the agencies know who's moving to where and what the impact is in terms of school places, in terms of health provision. Now, I'll be honest, it is a challenging area because there are accommodation pressures across the board. Sometimes our education colleagues would be clear that it's not always in the best interest of the child to move them from school to school to school, and there are occasions where children have been out of school for a short period of time with a view to moving them into more permanent accommodation that is better for them than chopping and changing schools 2 or 3 times. So, we certainly think that through the work that we're doing collectively with departments, and I think over the last year and a half, that's probably the one thing that we have managed to make significant improvements in through our structures is that we have all of the relevant departments and agencies around the table, both through the strategic planning group and through our sort of subgroups, task and finish groups and things that we would set up to look at these particular issues. Now, TEO doesn't provide education, doesn't provide housing, so we don't actually do the delivery, but what we are doing is where those issues are arising as a result of the different moves and the pressures that exist, is coordinating the work across our colleagues within the likes of the Housing Executive, the Education Authority and the departments to make sure that we can do as much as we can in that space to minimise the disruption to children and to families there, and that work, I mean, I think that Move On group meets fortnightly at this stage to look at these particular issues and do what we can.
Lee, did you want to comment?
No, sorry, I had nothing to add to that very comprehensive response from Orla there, and just perhaps to say that we link that up then really with the various funding provisions that we have. So the work that was identified through the CA, the Contingency Accommodation Hotels subgroup, and then the work that we're identifying through the Council Engagement Group and some other, the move-ons group that we have. We look at that in the context of the full dispersal asylum funding, and also with some refugee integration funding to see if we can support any of the key actions and priorities there. Obviously, it's much bigger in terms of, responsibilities lie with the departments within their policy areas of responsibility, but where we can support from that funding, we would do so.
If I can have another question, Chair.
Yes, go ahead, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for your response. I am really concerned about children in the asylum process, and as you say, there are absolutely children who aren't getting the education they need, especially children with special educational needs. They are a particularly vulnerable group, and something that I am really concerned about, and I want to ask, do you think children in the asylum system in Northern Ireland are safe? Do you link in with MERS? Are the people in MERS accommodation, do they have access and eye checks? Do they have child safeguarding checks? Because I think this could potentially be a huge issue with child safeguarding with families and vulnerable children in those hotels.
Well, through our contingency accommodation subgroup, it was on the back of those particular concerns that we actually set that subgroup up. Now our colleagues from health are obviously involved in that, and from education and from other departments. MERS and Home Office were involved in that subgroup as well. And again, the action plan did look at some of these things. Access and eye checks was one of the issues that was raised, and we did look alongside colleagues from health, looked at the different legislation to see if there was a requirement for further checks. There wasn't, in terms of what MERS was saying was being done. Now, what I will say is that part of it, the management of the hotels, the employment of staff, it isn't devolved, because the accommodation provision for asylum seekers isn't devolved. It's an accepted matter, and it's still maintained by the Home Office. But we did look at those particular issues, and we did get assurances from MERS that access and eye checks were being applied as they should be under the legislation. Our colleagues in the Department of Health are also working with MERS in a collaborative way to look at the safeguarding policies that are in place for adult and child safeguarding, and supporting and working with MERS to revise those policies to make sure that they are fit for purpose, and particularly in the Northern Ireland context. So we are working collaboratively with Home Office and MERS on that at the minute, and there has been work done through the role and action plan of the Contingency Accommodation subgroup. It was also part of the reason why collectively with our colleagues in Department of Health, we did write to Home Office and ask for the ICIBI inspection to be done in the context of contingency accommodation here, and the concerns raised around safeguarding. Now, that obviously has been done, and the report is being published alongside the Home Office response to the 5 recommendations, and we are, they are recommendations for the Home Office, but we are continuing to engage with Home Office on the implementation of those recommendations and the actions that they're going to be taking in that regard.
Just on that, so the inspection of these hotels, that's external. Is there a locally accountable body here for those inspections?
It's the ICIB, the Independent Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration, that took forward a Northern Ireland inspection of contingency accommodation, because ourselves and colleagues in health wrote to the Home Office to request that on the back of concerns that were raised. They do obviously wider inspections, and they are they were progressing one wider than Northern Ireland as well, but we were still being included in that. So that has been published, and the recommendations made, including 2 recommendations around safeguarding that are for Home Office to now implement, and that's what we will continue to engage with Home Office on their actions around that.
Thank you. Claire?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for presenting to the committee today. I suppose I'm hearing a lot about collaboration. I'm hearing a lot about groups coming together to talk about issues, but how does that actually translate to effective outcomes and delivery on the ground? Because my experience of asylum seekers in Northern Ireland is that the support services in Northern Ireland are incredibly poor, and it's really challenging, certainly as a constituency representative, to advocate on people's behalf. I'll give you an example of a case that I had dealt with. A child had made their way from Syria, 13 years old, and it felt like services were running down the clock to deport him when he came of age. And that's really concerning and that happened because there was no expertise, there was no support to help him write his asylum application so that he could have leave to remain. We engaged the services of Children's Law Centre, and thankfully they knew what they were doing to enable to do that. Now that young man now lives in England. He has a degree. He's contributing very effectively to as a citizen now of the UK in that form. But this is the experience right across the ground. So we can talk about, yes, we're all working together. It's a bit disappointing to hear as well that it's not my remit, it's housing, it's communities, and I appreciate that. But surely it's the role of the Executive Office to work together with their other government departments to ensure that these things are happening as a leader. I'll give you another example. I had a group of social workers within my constituency on Friday saying to me that there was a family of 6, I want to say, who had leave to remain within the UK, were living in a hostel in Portrush because they couldn't get accommodation elsewhere, in cramped conditions and all of those things. So we can talk about working together, we can talk about the coordination, but on the ground it's not delivering, and it's having a real impact on people's lives. If I appreciate it's a UK government responsibility ultimately, but when it comes to the services that these individuals are going to access when they're in Northern Ireland, we're not doing enough. And I would ask what the Executive Office is doing to lead on that, to actually ensure delivery on the ground.
And I suppose that, and I did sort of mention it in the opening remarks, we there still is distinct responsibilities within departments. So, we can't provide housing for people. We can't interfere in the education system.
And with respect, I said I recognise that, and I fully know the remits of individual departments, but this is one government, and the Executive Office is the department which leads on that. And
that is probably why that's why we have the strategic planning group and the tactical delivery group.
Okay, well then what's the outcomes of that? You said she's been meeting for over a year, so how is that addressing the issues that I've identified?
Part of the work is actually to deliver the thematic plans on what departments are actually going to do to meet the outcomes.
What does that look like?
Refugee.
I'm hearing strategy, I'm hearing policy, I'm hearing working together, but
Well,
how are you helping?
Yeah, they have to go to the executive to be agreed, so they're still draft at this stage in time. But again, even information sharing, if we take a year ago, there was no information coming between who was here, so that education knew who were the children that needed school places and where were they. There was no information coming to Housing Executive about people that were going to be presenting to Housing Executive to require housing when they moved from the asylum system.
Whose fault is that?
There was massive data sharing arrangements. Now we have managed to overcome that. We're not exactly where we would want to be, but we are certainly now in a much better place where there is data sharing arrangements, information sharing agreements, so that if somebody comes in and they're being moved, they get their status and they're being moved by Housing Executive to another area, there is now the ability for education colleagues to now know that that person is being moved and going to that place, rather than going to the school and find out they're not there anymore. So we do have a lot of work still to do, but there is certainly much better cooperation between departments in actually coming together and saying we have a particular issue or there's a particular family. Now, I will be upfront, there are challenges in respect of housing and school places that exist across the board, not necessarily unique to this cohort. So there will be occasions where people are in temporary accommodation that is not ideal, and Housing Executive are quite upfront about that. But it is about working to say, well, how quickly can they get moved on? What does that mean for their school place? And I would be reasonably assured now that education and colleagues and Housing Executive colleagues are actually working very closely together in some of these complex cases to try and find a solution. It doesn't mean necessarily there will be an immediate one and they'll have the answer that will be the best outcome for everybody. But compared to we were a year ago, I would be quite comfortable in saying we are in a much better position, that people are actually having that information sharing and looking at these cases. Even the family help pilot that operated within the contingency accommodation hotels to see families dig in, join the dots between who is here, where are they going, what are their needs, and if they're moved out of the hotels to somewhere else, who has to be notified and who will know that that family is now going to present somewhere else. So I totally appreciate that there will be cases that will continue to come through that will be particularly challenging, and there is still a lot of work to be done in this space. But I would be more reassured that we certainly have the collaboration across departments to at least know what the issues are, what we need to focus on, and through the strategy and the plan that we get detailed actions in there to say what we're actually going to do, notwithstanding the challenging landscape that we're operating within at this point in time.
But I would say that it isn't a mere few cases. I think it's the rule rather than the exception, and that's what we need to flip. Because, again, the experience on the ground, and, we have to bear in mind that when people seek asylum in the United Kingdom or indeed any other country, they're fleeing a country because of trauma. And the added impact that that's having when a child doesn't have accommodation or when they don't have, an education place. I appreciate it's not your fault. I appreciate the work's ongoing, and yes, it's good that we're one step closer. But, I think we really need to do more, and it is our responsibility to do that when they arrive here.
And one of the things we talk about the changing landscape, the sheer quantum of people going through that move on process at pace is 3 or 4 times what would have been the case, because as a result of the accelerated asylum process where people are getting their claims, which is, as I say, a good thing, because they get their decision more quickly and it gives them they can stay here longer term. But the sheer volume and the sheer pace of it is creating pressures in the local space, and it is something that we're very, very aware of. Now we would hope that in the longer term that will settle to go back to more normal numbers, which might be more manageable. So there is just this period where it is very, very challenging in this space to actually manage the local support with the volume and pace of people that are coming through the asylum process and actually moving into the refugee status piece. I mean, under the tactical delivery group, we are looking at some of these things, and one of the areas that we're looking at is what is the need, particularly for asylum seekers, in terms of trying to provide some additional support, not necessarily for everybody, but for those more complex cases who might need that additional. And we're working again with Education Authority and health colleagues on that to sort of start to look at what could we possibly do in this space.
Okay, thank you. Emma?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for your presentation. I think I know the answer to this. In your opinion, is the British Government and the British Home Office doing enough in terms of what their responsibility is?
I mean, to be honest, we do work very closely with Home Office. We have Home Office officials on our strategic planning group. They have engaged in a number of our subgroups. We meet with them very, very regularly in terms of Home Office policy and its implications and its impact here. I obviously can't comment from a Home Office perspective, but... Yeah,
but in terms of, because you've referred there in previous answers to having chased them and having engaged with them and raising issues, so are they doing enough?
I mean, I would say they're very engaged with us, and they do work with us in terms of what we need. They can't always provide everything that we may want for whatever reasons, but I certainly do feel that we get the engagement from the Home Office, and we work with them. We don't always get the answers that we might like to things, and sometimes they just aren't there, particularly when it comes to things like the IMA, when it's just not clear how that is going to unfold.
Okay, so when we have people presenting at our constituency offices who, as Connie and Claire have outlined, have issues accessing housing, have issues accessing education, who we feel that there is a concern around their safety, particularly of children, we know that the impact of all of this, particularly on young people who are coming here fleeing war, conflict, trauma, whose fault is that then when they're left sitting for a much longer time period than they should be without access to services and creating this situation whereby their trauma is being exacerbated?
Well, if it's a refugee, if somebody's got their refugee status, then they're entitled to the services within the devolved space. Asylum would be slightly different, yeah. Where we can't we're not able to provide housing or other things, and they have no recourse to public funds, etc. But certainly within the devolved space, I mean the landscape. I've said up front, it is a challenge because there are so many people. Our quantum, of arrivals here have quadrupled over the past number of years, so we aren't geared up to deal with this volume of people coming through the system, and changes in immigration policy obviously impacts locally. So one of the key areas that we do in our work and our day-to-day work is flag with Home Office any implications, any issues that we would have that impact in the devolved space. As I say, sometimes the policy is what the policy is, and it impacts us negatively, and it's not that we can take decisions on that, but we have to do our utmost within the devolved space to try and mitigate and manage that. And it is difficult with some of the context that there is in the background.
Just one more, Chair, if that's okay. So obviously when someone, what you had outlined previously was that the number of people who would have the description of asylum seeker is now probably reduced, in that their applications are being processed quicker, so they get their refugee status quicker, and then the responsibility of the devolved government bodies here. And prior to that, they're the responsibility of the British Home Office. So for all of those people who are presenting to us in distress, there's responsibility basically in both instances. But just in terms of the policy, because I've expressed concern, and I think everybody has, around the illegal migration bill and the Rwanda policy and the negative implications that has. I mean, I'm concerned about the real life implications for those people who have that as a threat, but I'm also really concerned about the implications that rhetoric and that legislation has in terms of legitimising those sorts of views within the community. And we know that when people are put in the sorts of accommodation that Claire referred to earlier, in hostels, and we've got hotels and all of that being used to house, whether it be asylum seekers or ultimately then refugees who can't access housing here when they should be able to, we have a situation then where we can see a them versus us start to begin in local communities where people can't access the services that they should be able to access, and that's a failure of the system as opposed to the people that they're now punching down at. So I just wonder if you can see that in real life in terms of what you're trying to deliver.
We have seen the increase in incidents across the board, race hate incidents and around banners, etc., going up. DOJ did lead a piece of work on that, and within TEO, my colleague Ricky is actually leading a piece of work on that alongside the other departments and agencies to look to see, in terms of this a sort of rhetoric that's going about and some of the race hate incidents that occur, and what can we do in that space. So we actually had a meeting earlier this week, and there is work ongoing to look at what actions we could actually take forward in there. Now Ricky could give you more information on this when he's up briefing, but we are looped in on that along with Housing Executive, Justice colleagues, health colleagues, because we're very mindful, given, and I suppose part of it is the sheer quantum of people coming through, the pressures that are on the system that exist already, and then people are going into local communities, and one of the things that we're very mindful of is ultimately we want people to be safe, but equally we want people to be able to access the support and services that they're entitled to. So there is actually now a strategic group that is looking specifically at that issue, and what we can do in that space and what actions we can take. So I mean, I'm sure Ricky will provide further brief on that when he's up with the committee, but it certainly is an area of work that is being given the senior officials right across the board involved in that group, which has now met twice and has been tasked with looking at some of the things that we could actually take forward around that to try and minimise the risks associated with this.
Would it be okay if I just interjected slightly to add a point that you were raising about responsibilities there? I think I don't need to tell members that this is a really complex space, and no one organisation can actually deal with the full range of issues on their own. So it would be, we can't say it's all the responsibility of the Home Office or it's all the responsibility of the devolved side. I think the cooperation piece is absolutely key, even with asylum seekers, where a lot of the function does rest with Home Office. There is still stuff that we are leaning into in the devolved side, because it's things like health and education, some of the issues that members have raised today. And then it's the same as well when people get their status, and I think that's what you were raising as well, although that does come fairly and squarely onto the shoulders of the devolved side, we still need to work very closely with Home Office in terms of our interface with the exiting from their system into the devolved system, so that those people are cared for. And just because of the huge quantums that we've had, and I think we have touched on this, at one point we did actually have a 10-fold increase in the numbers of people coming across. It has eased now down to a 3-fold increase. It's great, of course, that people are getting their status, but if we just think about the impact that has in terms of the volumes and the short space of time, I mean, unfortunately that has meant that people have had to go into emergency accommodation or hostels. But now that we are cooperating, and that is very much what the TEO role is, it's the liaison, it's the coordination, because as Orla has very clearly said and has been acknowledged, we can't deliver alternate public services to those that are the responsibility of other government departments. But where we try to ease things is in that coordination piece and that joint working. And a good example of that then, I was thinking about whenever you were asking about that cooperation, was even something as simple as a lot of the difficulties our asylum seekers have had is around the ability to travel, just locally around the various areas here, because the funding or the money that they have is very limited. Again, through the coordination work that Orla was mentioning, we were able to work with a range of different organisations to get, now it was a pilot, unfortunately, it's still ongoing, but we were able to get a good number of free travel cards made available to asylum seekers, and all the feedback on that. Now that's delivered through DFI, but all the feedback on that has been very positive, and that's helping the space much more than DFI, because obviously they're the enabler, but it's helping people get to health appointments, it's helping people, get their kids to school, it's helping with various integration initiatives that are being run by different councils and other partners. So it's that collaboration piece, I think. Sorry if I have expanded on that too much, but it was just to say it's not just a one-size-fits-all.
Okay, thank you. Sinead, please.
Okay, thank you for your presentation to date. Orla, just back onto the race hate crime and it rising considerably. I've really felt the brunt of that, as all of our party members have, and representatives this week, with the brilliant announcement about Lillian Senior Barr becoming the first black mayor in Northern Ireland. But the hate that came in with social media was incredible, and I think we as a society need to kind of deal with that in a much more proactive way, and it's integration needs to be positive. It's not framing it in as a problem, but it's a positive, and the contributions that our refugee community give to society has to be celebrated. And I think as part of that integration strategy, is there a celebration element of it about how good our communities, our new communities are for everything, for our public service and everything else, because we seem to determine, our terminology, our language is about, what we have to find, what we have to give, instead of what we're actually receiving. And I just don't know. I was horrified at some of the language that we were seeing. It was kind of long-standing, other councillors, long-standing, or, it was really racist language, and people didn't even know that they were being racist in their commentary. So I think that there has to be more positive communication and marketing around our refugee community. And how are you doing that within the integration strategy?
Yeah. And I couldn't agree more, absolutely. And it's one of the areas that we're looking at in terms of the refugee integration strategy, and particularly under the thematic delivery plans. One of the areas there is around engagement and inclusion. We very much see integration as a two-way process, and as you say, a positive thing. It brings massive benefits to communities, and some of the actions that we'll be looking at within the TEU context is around that comms, that information, that myth busting piece around how do we get actually the positive side of this out as to what our refugee and asylum community and the benefits that they actually bring to all of us, which quite often don't get seen because the negative takes over. So it is definitely something that we are looking at in terms of actions within the thematic delivery plan around this, and within our division just collectively, as to how we can sort of enhance comms and information around our refugee and asylum population and the positive side of that.
And then just on that, because there's an area of employment obviously, and maybe the qualification aspect of the moving on. Can you talk more about that, how you're supporting refugees to become integrated into our economy and supporting our economy and maybe retraining at some point to make sure that they're supported?
I mean, employment is obviously one of the areas under there, as equally is ESOL, volunteering, education and training. And one of the things we've actually been discussing at our tactical delivery group is the linking across all of them, and particular issues when people arrive at certain, particularly children that are in that sort of end of school age year, that there's maybe additional barriers to them accessing further education, whether it's English language barriers or whatever it happens to be. So we are actually working in a small group with other departments to look particularly at this issue and what we could sort of look to do in this space that might work. There are challenges with qualifications, particularly in those that are regulated at a national level, where they're not easily transferable. But what we have done in the Ukraine context, we have done a skills and employment survey for Ukrainians to try and understand what skills, experience, qualifications are people actually bringing. We're in the process of finalising a similar survey for the wider refugee and asylum population to understand their skills and experience, and then linking in with like health trusts, with business in the community, for example, to see what are the needs out there, what are the barriers to people that actually prohibit them from taking up employment or developing their skills further, and how can we marry the two and to see what we could do in that. So the skills survey for the Ukrainians is complete. The one for refugee and asylum is slightly more complex. We've had to use about 11 different languages, etc., to be translated into, but again, we're hoping to have that out by the summertime and get then that completed and get a picture of what is this population bringing that we don't always see in terms of their skills and experience, and what are the barriers to them taking up employment. And then we would be bringing that back into our TDG and SPG to say, well, look, here's the picture. So what can we do in this space? We won't be able to do everything. We can't override national qualification regulations, but there may be instances where we've seen this actually in the Ukrainian context, where people were able to get an additional bit of training to become translators and that sort of thing. So there may be small things that we can do in that space that aren't as difficult as some of the others, but it is certainly an area that we're looking at under the strategy and the delivery plans to see how we can try and what are the barriers and what can we do to actually address them.
I've met refugees that are dentists, consultants, and which obviously have a lot to offer, but also I want to know about the integration in terms of what support are you giving them, regarding maybe making contact with other family members. If you're working with them in the Home Office, are you given in the integration plan, are you giving them support in those ways so that they...
What do you mean in that context?
Kind of advice services, if they have other requirements, if they're trying to, for example, support family reunion applications and maybe cement their immigration status in the UK, such as their British citizenship, is the integration strategy looking at those other areas? Because they're really difficult areas to navigate, particularly.
That was one of the reasons why we actually went and funded the immigration advice, because that was one of the key things that we've seen, that people, even when you come here initially, and even through some of them resettlement schemes, there's different stages where you still, different things apply. A child is born, how does that child get their status? Changes in the Ukrainian schemes, for example, where you have to apply to different. So that is primarily was the driver for the immigration advice, to make sure that is regional and for everybody rather than just Ukrainians. Okay. And that funding is ongoing at this point in time to support that.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, if I might just very briefly.
Two more to come in, go ahead.
No, that's okay. I mean, it's just to try and reassure members, I suppose, as Orla indicates, there are things happening. The immigration advice is one. We will make a lot of reference to the strategy document, to the thematic delivery plans, and lots of stuff that we know that we want to do and that we need to do. And we recognise that there's a journey ahead of us there. But we've started that journey. There are pieces that are being delivered on the ground for people. And on the skills point that Ms McLaughlin mentioned, we have taken the results of that survey to Invest NI, for example, who are now engaging with various sector representative bodies in the employment side. So we're hoping, I say, when we get the wider survey out and the results back, that you'll see a real increase in pace on that work. But as to say, to reassure members that we understand those challenges are there and that we're very committed to addressing them.
I was going to save my question to the end, but I think I'll just pick up there. And it's really about, you've talked about a lot of really good work, a lot of busy work, and I'm just wondering how can we as a committee measure that? Do you report on this every 6 months, every year? How do we know that what all these tactical delivery groups and task and finish groups, how do we know that they're actually producing anything? How often will we as a committee see reports or be published on the website?
I mean, the main thing will probably be the thematic delivery plans under the refugee integration strategy. They will set out what departments are doing in this space to meet the overall outcomes of the refugee integration strategy. So subject to executive agreement of those, the intention would be that there will be an annual report on progress around all of that. So, and again, we're equally happy to come back and brief the committee at any point in time, should members wish.
Okay, thank you. I'm bringing in Padraig. Thank you. You're next. So, Padraig, can you hear us okay? Oh, we can't hear you, sorry.
Patrick's having a nightmare. His
I know.
laptop was updating. I guess we couldn't get it to start.
Yeah, that should have let me unmute now, did it?
Go ahead, that's you. Go ahead, Padraig. Thank you.
Thank you. Folks, thank you firstly for your presentation. And I think a lot of the points that I have been going to raise have already been raised. I'll come to those in a minute. I just wanted to touch on the points that Sinead made as well. I think this week in Derry, we've seen absolutely vile abuse directed towards our new mayor, our incoming mayor for next year, Lillian Sinoy Barr. Lillian's been a fantastic advocate for migrants, for refugees, and I think she'll be a fantastic mayor. I'm really looking forward to working with her. So I just wanted to put that on the record first, because I do think that it ties in with all of what's been discussed already. For example, we've worked, it was recently at their awards evening, and the work that Lillian's done on health, on housing, on education, with people who are coming to Derry or coming to Ireland and calling it their home has been fantastic. And I think it's a great advocacy and really great work that's being done across our city and beyond. So I suppose my questions really were going to be around health and going to be around housing, but I appreciate you've touched on a lot of that. One of the, I suppose, overarching concerns that I would have is we can look at it on a macro level, and we can look on it then in terms of more detail. And I suppose in terms of the macro level, we already have, Emma's already touched a lot on the British government's role in that. I have to say that when my office have been in touch with the Home Office, and I know that's the experience of a lot of other elected reps, the experience from the Home Office has been absolutely atrocious, to be honest. So I do see that as a real barrier to how we can work together on it. But in terms of the more localised level and the issues that are devolved that we can work on, I'm keen to hear a wee bit more on how we can avoid siloed approaches and how, as a committee, we can assist you in your work and what you would see as the barriers to those. Because I think what I've heard so far today has been that there's a lot of good work, there's a lot of stuff that people want to do, but there's a lot further that we can go. So I'm keen to see where are the obstacles to that and how can we assist you in removing those obstacles.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for that. I do, and I said this earlier, it's not perfect. We don't have the answers to everything, and we still have a lot of work to do. But I do genuinely believe we have much better collaboration across departments than we ever did have. And I do think that stemmed from the necessity that arose from the Ukraine crisis, where we had to just get stuck in, and we have been able to sort of build on and harness those relationships. So, we lift the phone regularly to colleagues across departments and say, look, there's an issue. We get the letters in from people who are probably writing equally to you around specific cases, and if we lift the phone to colleagues, there's no issue. They'll come on to a Teams meeting and say, what can we do here? Now, we don't always have an immediate solution, and some of this does just take time given capacity issues and issues on the ground and housing demands and all the rest of it that goes on and the context that we're working in. But I mean, I genuinely don't feel, and colleagues will correct me if they think differently, that there is an issue with departments engaging. funding is always a challenge, and we try and maximise the use of the funding that we get in from Home Office or DLUC under the various schemes, and work with departments to see how we can best use them. And I mean, we discussed at our tactical delivery group about trying to be a bit smarter around that. How can we use the money that we have? Equally, departments are looking at the funding that they may need in the context of our strategy to make sure that we can maximise delivery. But, you know, funding is always a challenge, particularly in the current climate. So, you know, I actually think where we have made the most progress is probably within the engagement and the buy-in and the cooperative working across departments and actually indeed the agencies as well. So I do genuinely feel we're in a much better place. Now there are some difficult issues that we're grappling with and trying to find a solution for, and it may just take a little longer. So I'm not actually sure that I would say there's an issue there that we would want the committee to do anything in terms of the engagement we have with other departments, because I do think that has probably been the area we've managed to make the most progress on. We just need to now be very clear on, here are our priority areas. We can't address absolutely everything, but here are the number of things that we want to make progress on over the next year. Here's the departments that are involved and here's what we're going to do, and that should become evident through the plans whenever they are actually agreed and published.
Yeah, no, I think that's really useful, and it's reassuring to hear that. One of the things that I think would be most pertinent that we raise in this committee as well is that it would be wrong to view refugees as a homogenous group. And I think that what we need to do is actually to look at the differentiation in terms of health and in terms of needs as well. One of the key points which I wanted to touch on as well, and I appreciate, I think Connie raised this in part earlier as well, translation services for healthcare, healthcare support. I'm just keen to hear a wee bit more on that, because I was having sort of technical issues earlier, so it maybe missed part of it. But if there was any other detail on that, I would be really grateful, because we're getting a lot of people here through our office who we want to support. We want to do our best to assist them. But to be honest, I'm not really sure that all those services are in place to provide them with the assistance which they need or which they're entitled to. So any information, either through the meeting or even after, I appreciate some of it might be in writing, but if you could provide us with any of that detail, it'd be very much appreciated.
Yeah, I mean, a translation services hasn't actually been raised with us as a particular issue. So if there are issues around that, it would be helpful if you would be happy to share that with us, and we can certainly pick it up with colleagues. It isn't something that has certainly been brought to my attention as a major issue, but if it is, we're very happy to engage with the other departments on that to see where the issues are.
Okay, thank you for your help.
Did you want to come in?
Just very briefly, Chair, and I think that's a great question for Mr. Delargy about what can you do to help us, and certainly from an operational aspect, I would suggest building your knowledge of this area, and that's not to say you don't have any knowledge at this point, but I think it's fantastic that you have people coming in to give you some viewpoints after we leave today. I engage regularly with some of the representative groups. I met Ms. Sharon at the Refugee and Asylum Forum meeting a couple of weeks ago in this building, because that's how we're going to learn as well, is by listening to what the needs are and how we can improve services. And as I say, we're committed to delivering them, and the committee, as you build your knowledge, will be able to come to us, talk to us about it, challenge us, and maybe, as I say, give us a helping hand at the end of the day.
Brian?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your information today. This is a complicated issue, and I appreciate the presentations. I have two questions of time, one about accommodation and one about support for people who get the right to leave. So, in terms of accommodation, what is the overall direction of travel? I understand there's a move away from hotel accommodation. That then puts pressures on local communities where people complain to me that Mears is renting out properties at a higher rate, maybe £800 a week for a terraced house, above what the private rented sector level is. And we've seen, and this is an issue across many countries, but we've seen a reaction in Belfast in some local communities. I see plenty of stuff which comments that I would not support, and as I would have no place for. But I don't want to dismiss what is genuine concerns when people see properties that was previously available locally, and then they're being moved in through Mears into accommodation for asylum seekers and refugees, and that has caused a reaction. And that's something at local level we try to manage that and encourage people to see society is changing, it's becoming more diverse, Northern Ireland's becoming more international. We see that in the census figures, we see that in the people working in our public services and so on. So I suppose my question is, what's the direction of travel in terms of accommodation, in terms of managing that at community level? What effort goes into working with local communities? Dispersal maybe, if you get a high concentration in one area, that's going to cause a reaction. So rather than just dismiss all those concerns, there are genuine concerns that people have, and I and others try to work with that, encourage people to be reasonable, understand how people are entitled to a service. Every country has to have immigration control, border controls, immigration policy. That's a separate matter to the humane treatment of people while they're here and while their applications are being serviced or processed. Second question, very briefly, appreciate we're running out of time, is about, I've been contacted just there at the weekend by someone who's just been given right to leave. He's been here over 10 years and he's now losing his accommodation. His ex-wife and their 2 children, he originally told me they're out in the street, literally. The daughter ended up in hospital. They're now staying with a friend. But he's saying that he wants to get work now, but now he's got the right to leave. Suddenly that accommodation provided through mayors is ending, and that's caused a crisis. Now, I don't know what the time scale, I'm still digging through the detail of it. So in terms of people getting the right to stay, I might have said right to stay, obviously is where they're trying to get to, but that then can put them into another crisis if the support services are ending. So in that transition phase, people are trying to get work, what is the support that's provided then?
I mean, 2 elements of that, and just factually in terms of, the use of hotels, the Home Office intention is to continue to reduce and exit hotels, and that is why they have their dispersal plans to move people into dispersed accommodation, which is a good thing for people who are in hotels where they will be moved into dispersed accommodation, and a lot of them will then get their refugee status as a result of the streamlined asylum process as well. So that is the direction of travel from a Home Office perspective. Totally appreciate, and it's the race hate issues that we touched on earlier. And certainly engagement in local communities at local level. Julie, you may want to come in a bit on some of our SMP work that we do in that space, and again, that is one of the things that we talked about in terms of that wider work that we're looping in with other departments in that strategic group around the whole race hate instances and what we can do there. And some of it is probably more about engagement with communities and community leaders and elected representatives as well in that space, to make sure that the information is there and people know and understand what's happening and are clear on that. And then I suppose, Julie, in terms of our, obviously there was an SMP here. We have taken on some of the SMP functions. We haven't become the SMP, but we have adopted some of the engagement communication type functions. And at the minute we're doing a piece of work in and around the whole heat mapping piece right across the council areas to understand, what is the position on the ground locally, to help inform Home Office dispersal plans as to where they do and don't place people. Now, we have no decision-making role in where they actually disperse people to, but we are very keen to ensure that they understand the local landscape and that any decisions take cognizance of that. So we do lean into that work to try and make sure that they are fully informed in terms of where they do disperse people. And then in terms of that move-on process, we have our move on group locally, our coordination group, which looks at, in a local context, what do we do? But equally, there is a group that is led by Home Office, which is the delivery board, where again ourselves, housing executive, health colleagues, others will all sit on that as well. In terms of that planning piece, what is coming through the system? What is the sort of medium to longer term flow through that we're going to see? When are people going to get their claims? What's coming at us, so that we can try then locally to prepare for how many people are going to be presenting to the housing executive, where are these people currently based, what are they going to need. Now that is challenging when you don't always get an awful lot of notice as to when people get their status and move on, but those 2 structures are specifically to try and focus in on that move on process and allow us to be as prepared as we can be and look at what the implications would be locally and how we can gear up to try and provide the support as best we possibly can. But Julie, you may want to add to that.
Who do you say delivery groups led by?
So TEO chair a move on coordination group, so that is with other agencies and departments here. Home Office chair a move on delivery group, which we sit on alongside others, and that's the bit about giving us a bit of insight into what is coming through the system and out the other end, so that helps inform what we do in the devolved space to prepare. Now again, we don't always have all of the information at the time we will need it, and there are challenges around the level of notice periods that are given for people to move on to the statutory agencies, but our coordination group is then looking a lot of that to see what we can do in this space to try and minimise the impact on people that are having that transition from the asylum state into their long-term settlement here.
Okay, we might get back to you with that, about setting up some meetings, maybe with you know.
Sorry, Julie, did you want to add anything? Cause
if that would be okay, yes. Just to add that you mentioned that it's not, there would be too much if everything was in the one area. That's quite right, and that's why there is dispersal. Now the aim is ultimately that we'll have it across all 11 councils. At the minute it's only across 7, but we're very much working with our partners to support dispersal across all councils. And that is just to deal with the issue that historically it used to all be in Belfast, and there was no way that that would support the needs that we currently have. In terms of the fact that it's a Home Office decision, that is true, but we do influence and work with them in that process, because the coordination role we were mentioned earlier, we bring in our key partners across the departments in terms of education, health, community tensions, and some issues around other provision as well, to advise on any pressures that there may be in dispersing to a certain area. So that hopefully does guide if the decisions that are made by the Home Office and by mayors. But we cannot make the decision for them, but we certainly would seek to influence it as far as we could do that, bearing in mind it is in the accepted space. Once people get their leave to remain, that they can stay here, they then come over fully onto the devolved side. And there are organisations set up to support that transition. There's so much of the transition at the minute because of the clearance of the backlogs in Home Office. That's something that the Home Office have been very open about. They've been trying to do the asylum backlog over this last number of months. Now, while it's fantastic people are getting their status, that is a big pressure for us at the moment. And if it would be helpful, we could make information available afterwards in terms of contact points if people were getting queries about where they can go to get assistance with health needs, education needs, even help with employment, help with accessing benefits and universal credit and things like that that they would not previously have been able to do because they were asylum seekers.
Through the chair, can you get that information as soon as possible?
Yes.
Okay.
Certainly.
Thank you.
I don't want to elongate this session too long, but I'm slightly concerned about what was just said there. And I'm just wondering, I represent South Belfast, and we've seen a lot of intimidation, a lot of racially motivated attacks, and there's an elephant in the room here around where those originate from. And I'm just conscious you're talking about their influence in the dispersal, and I wouldn't like to think that, obviously we have to think about the safety of people, but I wouldn't like to think that because of these so-called paramilitary gangs, because they're intimidating people out of their houses, that in some ways people are being, the influence is about, no, don't send them there because they won't be safe. And but my question is, but in what way do people with lived experience feed into you so that you can feed that through into the Home Office in terms of influencing that?
I mean, just on your point there, the first point, it's about informing Home Office. It's not, there's no instances where we would be saying there's areas you shouldn't go to. No. We just want them to understand here's where the services are. So here's where there might be, and some of it's
that's what I'm talking about, the lived experience where people say, actually, it is better.
Yeah. Some of it's about who you place where. So for example, education contact colleagues might say, there is no you'll not get a post-primary place in Belfast. It's saturated, so don't put families with post-primary children there. Maybe Home Office might want to look at moving, it's that sort of thing. It's not about saying there's no-go areas or areas that you shouldn't go into. It's just giving them the information on, here's where our education capacity issues are, here's where there is housing capacity issues, here's where there's GP registration capacity issues that you will want to be aware of when you're making your decisions on dispersal. So it's just to make that clear, that's what that heat mapping piece is about. What was your second point there?
Well, it really was just about that. It was about people with lived experience, about how they can feed into that process.
Yeah, and it's one of the things we're really actually keen to ensure and keen to build on throughout the lifetime of the strategy. So, we are there's a piece of research actually ongoing at the minute for people with lived experience to understand that. There is regular surveys that are done to understand, people's views of, asylum seekers and refugees and what they feel. One of the things we're mindful of in the context of the strategy is, data is very difficult in this space. You don't have a lot of it. So quantitative data can be a challenge. What we're very keen to do is make sure that we have qualitative data and direct input from refugees and asylum seekers themselves, and quite often that will be through workshops and research pieces and things like that. So Red Cross have been commissioned at this point in time to do a piece of work for us around this, but it's something that we would be very keen as part of our monitoring and evaluation of the strategy to ensure that we factor that in throughout and get that lived experience, because it is so important that we hear directly from people.
Okay. Go ahead.
And I promise I'll be even shorter than normal. I mean, yes, we do a lot of talking, we engage with a lot of people. We have a voluntary community sector forum, which I chair, so that's mainly organisations who work with a lot of the people who have the lived experience, so we hear a lot through that, and we will build on that. But within the strategy and the thematic plans, our intention is to set up some sort of group, yet to be titled, but it will certainly reflect different communities and those who have been through each of the different pathways and journeys to here. So, we promise we will be listening.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And again, it was a long session. I think it was.
Sorry,
I was useful. No, not at all, not at all. But obviously, we'll come back to this. We'll invite you back later on. So, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, members, just take your ease for a moment. Then, so we're moving on. Our next oral briefing is the Law Centre, isn't it? Yeah, that's okay. So the next oral briefing is from Law Centre NI. So the clerk's brief is on page 28. There is a refugees statistics paper found at page 3 of table papers, and then on page 14 of the table pack there are the priorities for action. Okay. Apologies for the delay, ladies, but I think there's some important areas covered there that will obviously inform what you're going to talk to us about. So we have Liz Griffith, who is the Senior Research and Policy Officer at the Law Centre NI, and Neve Rowan, who is the Community Engagement Officer also at Law Centre NI. Okay, I say welcome, ladies, and when you're ready, if you want to brief members, thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank you all. Chair, thank you for this opportunity to come and talk to you. Thank you for your interest in refugee issues, as is evidenced by all the questions that members have just put forward. I hope that members are familiar with the work of the Law Centre. We've been doing immigration work since the late 1980s, and we are a regional service. In the last year, I think 70% of our work came from outside of Belfast. We did hundreds of immigration cases and thousands of pieces of advice, and we try to prioritise forced migration. So most of our work is asylum seekers, refugees, and survivors of human trafficking. Myself and Neve, we're here from the Migration Justice Project, which is a small project within the Law Centre. And there are 3 strands, legal, policy, myself, and community engagement, who is Neve. So I'll pass over to Neve.
Yeah, thank you very much for having us today. My name is Neve Rowan. I'm the Community Engagement Officer at the Migration Justice Project, as Liz has said. So part of my role is engaging the community, trying to be the bridge between the Law Centre and the community of refugees and asylum seekers and organisations supporting them. One of my roles at the Law Centre is coordinating the Refugee and Asylum Forum, which is a network of currently over 60 organisations and 160 individuals across Northern Ireland. It's an information sharing network. It's a coordination network. Through the Refugee Asylum Forum, we've produced the Priorities for Action report, which TEO colleagues have mentioned there earlier, and we'll make sure you get a copy of that. So we feel we're well placed to comment on the subject today.
Bolstered by all the expertise in the room behind us, who are going to come in. So we would like to talk to you about 4 different areas, and then we'll be very happy to take questions. So I think first we'd like to comment on this new division that you've just heard about, then talk about the refugee integration strategy, and we'd like to say something about the Ukraine response, and then talk to you about some of the kind of the wider challenges within the refugee support sector. So first of all, with regards to the new division, I mean, obviously we welcome it. And having a division that focuses on refugees and having that sit within the executive office, I think sends out a really important message about the significance of refugee matters. We, Law Centre, we see our role as a critical friend of the executive office. It's a role we take quite seriously, and we are critical, but we try and do so in a constructive manner. It's early days of this new division, but there's a lot that we welcome, not least it is going to be looking at engagement structures. And so the Law Centre, we're glad that we were invited to be part of this voluntary and community sector forum, which Johnny mentioned. Chair, you asked a question about, well, where is the lived experience in all of this? And we agree there needs to be a mechanism. Up until now, there is no mechanism whereby people with lived experience can feed in directly. We're glad to hear that is in development, but arguably that should have been in place from day one. I think we also really welcome this work going on to improve the data sets, because we've been in the dark for a long time about all things immigration and data. So having improved data will help in terms of accountability. I would say that although it is new, it has now been in existence for 18 months. And I think it does need to now demonstrate that its commitment is to promote refugee integration for all nationalities, for all refugees. And I think also with regards to this division, we heard that it has taken on a number of the functions of the now defunct Strategic Migration Partnership. And I'm just flagging to the committee that Northern Ireland is now the only region in the UK that doesn't have a Strategic Migration Partnership. So, that might be something that you keep on your radar in terms of, well, what are we missing? So if I may move on then to talk about the refugee integration strategy. Chair, you mentioned in your opening remarks that this was committed to first time in 2005. So we're almost 20 years on without a strategy. In contrast, Scotland is now on its 3rd iteration. So we have had whole refugee programmes, like the Syrian programme, start and finish without an agreed strategy. And I think a lot of the difficulties that some of them have been discussed this afternoon, a lot of it can be attributed to the fact that we don't have an agreed strategy. We don't have an agreed understanding or shared understanding of what successful integration is. So we, the Voluntary and Community Sector Forum, last week we received a copy of the strategy. It's in draft form. And overall, we think it's very positive. It's clearly rooted in human rights standards. It's ambitious. It picks up on a number of the activities that we proposed in the Priorities for Action government, the Priorities for Action document. So it's good. Our one key criticism, though, of the strategy is around the kind of the vision. So we heard today that executive colleagues, you know, they liaise with the Home Office, they engage with the Home Office, they work in partnership with the Home Office. And kind of respectfully, we would say that, well, that's not always sufficient. And we need to have a strategy where the Executive Office sets out a robust and much bolder stance in regards to its relationship with the Home Office. And I don't want to get into too much of the technical detail, but we've had two big, well now 3 pieces of immigration legislation, including the Illegal Migration Act, in which the Home Office has legislated on issues of devolved competency. And I think regardless of which political party you're from, you can see the problem with that. And 2 areas where they've done that, one has been around unaccompanied children, and the other has been around victims and survivors of human trafficking. So we think that the strategy needs to be really clear that there will be times when the Executive Office needs to, if you like, defend the space, and that it should, the strategy should be really clear that the Executive Office has a challenge function, that it doesn't just liaise and partner, but that it will critique and challenge and be really clear that that there will be times when that is necessary to protect the areas on which this Assembly has already legislated on. So if I may move on to talk about the Ukraine scheme, it was a great example of really good partnership work, I think, led by the Executive Office, brought in a lot of different government departments and the voluntary and community sector. And we at Law Centre were very proud to have played our part. We have since, highlighted in our submissions to the UN and whatnot to say it is an example of good practice. So we commend the Executive Office for having done it. That said, we're disappointed that it was stood down in October 23, and the vulnerabilities that we were picking up day in, day out, me and colleagues were there, those vulnerabilities haven't gone away. We just don't see them anymore. And so, we were disappointed that it was disbanded or stood down. And we're also disappointed in that when it was set up, we could immediately see the potential for other people fleeing other war and conflict and persecution. And when it was first set up, executive colleagues said that they were looking at trying to expand the concept. But then we haven't heard much more about that. And so there is quite clearly, in our view, a potential to replicate aspects of that Ukraine Assistance Centre model to benefit other refugees. I could talk more, and I can pick up in questions about this issue of how the Executive Office did respond effectively to the Ukraine crisis, but it is really now time to show its commitment to other nationalities. I think I will pass over to my colleague Niamh to talk about the challenges within the refugee support sector.
Yep, so thanks Liz, I'm going to speak about the refugee support sector. So as you're aware, the community and voluntary sector in Northern Ireland are doing an awful lot of the heavy lifting. So from large national charities like the Red Cross, who are represented here today, to some smaller charities who are behind me as well, waiting to speak to you. So that's the fact that the voluntary and community sector is doing so much work is really compounded by, as Liz said, so many changes in policy and process, but also a lack of coordination, we feel. With asylum dispersal moving outside of Belfast, where the expertise in refugee asylum matters have traditionally sat, this leaves regional areas then trying to play catch-up, regional support services trying to get their heads around refugee and asylum issues. We've seen a significant increase in the number of asylum seekers since 2022. So as a result of that, the needs have trebled. The school place needs, registering with schools, registering with GPs, complex needs, issues of domestic abuse that we traditionally see in communities have also trebled. As TEO mentioned earlier, there's 3 times more people transitioning out of the asylum process. So that's putting huge pressure on the voluntary and community sector, and that's why members are seeing these queries coming into their constituency offices. So the reliance, it feels like the reliance is on the community and voluntary sector to plug a lot of the gaps where the statutory services really should be stepping in and providing this work. The community and voluntary sector is helping people to navigate a number of complicated processes and systems. So the asylum process, asylum support process, the legal process, and then when people get their refugee leave to remain, processes about rights to benefits and housing, work and the like. So this is very time-consuming work for community and voluntary sector organisations. And this is time that could be spent focused on more complex and more pressing needs if the services were more accessible. So a big problem is the lack of information for those communities. There's very little information on NI Direct for refugees and asylum seekers, as distinct from Ukrainians. There's an awful lot of information available there. The majority of information resources for refugees and asylum seekers have almost entirely been developed by the community and voluntary sector. And the services, as I said, are not accessible. So, for example, community and voluntary sector organisations might spend half their morning phoning a GP service to get an appointment for one of their members because the GP services are not accessible. Another huge issue is obviously funding. We've talked about it already. So the increase in people arriving seeking sanctuary has not been matched in an increase in funding. The tripling of people transitioning out of the asylum process as refugees has not been matched by an increase in funding for services such as extern. The funding is precarious. The sector is reliant on the MEDF, the Minority Ethnic Development Fund. Although we welcome the move to a 3-year cycle, it's still precarious for smaller organisations, particularly those led by lived experience, to plan for the future. We would argue that the MEDF funding does not meet the needs necessarily of refugee and asylum communities, and that there should be ring-fenced funding for forced migration support. So where MEDF is focused on combating racism and celebrating multiculturalism, the refugee and asylum sector needs expertise and specialism in issues affecting those groups specifically. Another issue with funding, is the Home Office asylum dispersal money, which a lot of organisations have benefited from recently. The TU has given that money out to councils to distribute. The funding for this financial year has not yet been agreed, and a lot of those organisations are running their services on hot air at the minute. So that includes school readiness programmes, bilingual helpline for Ukrainians, English classes, and also a lot of the good relations funding has been severely diminished where they were filling that gap. So that might be something the committee would want to push forward on, is getting that funding secured for the sector. And finally, on lived experience, the Executive Office has identified the need to engage with people with lived experience. There's an awful lot of work to be done in community development and bringing forward those leaders of tomorrow who are from a lived experience background. So we need investment in that particular work to make sure that the people sitting here at the committee next year and the year after are the people who've been through forced migration. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, ladies, and thank you for your papers in advance. They were very comprehensive. I just want to pick up on the issue around sort of human trafficking and exploitation, and just to what degree you're finding cases coming in front of you in that space. I've heard so many stories and dealt with so many stories in my own constituency office. I'm just wondering, you know, are you seeing a rise in that and how you're equipped to deal with them?
Yeah, thank you. So there has been, I actually don't have the trafficking stats in front of me, but the numbers have increased very dramatically. And part of the reason of increases of potential victims of human trafficking has been better recognition that a number of asylum seekers have concurrent trafficking matters. And for a number of the asylum seekers arriving in Northern Ireland, they have been subject to exploitation, often en route. And it's quite particular to people having fled the kind of Horn of Africa, including Eritrea, which is our largest asylum nationality, would be people from Eritrea, passing through Libya, are really can be very vulnerable to all sorts of forms of exploitation. So we at the Law Centre, we often would be instructed to act on both the asylum matter and the trafficking matter. I should say though that the interaction between those two legal processes can be quite complex. And if you're successful in your refugee claim, you would be granted 5 years leave to remain, and that leads to settlement. Whereas protection within a trafficking sense is a 1-year renewable residence permit. And what we are finding, and I guess this kind of anecdotal, this is Law Centre's experience, is that over the years, the Home Office have reduced or are no longer as likely to grant continued grants of leave to survivors of trafficking. So the attitude seems to be, we'll grant you an initial 1 year, primarily with the view that you can give evidence against perpetrators of trafficking, and once those criminal processes are complete, then your leave isn't continued. So that's just something that we've observed.
That's credible, isn't it? The trauma they've already been through. And I suppose that just to pick up on the second point there around Kate Nicholl and I have been working with some women who have experienced, as you say, either en route or the reason for flee, domestic abuse, and obviously they're getting great support through Women's Aid. But in terms of their accommodation, then because they're singles, then they're in, you know, in mixed accommodation. So we just wonder, to what degree are MERS more readily are more up for moving people where there are potential difficulties in terms of the accommodation they've been placed into based on their own lived experience, if that makes sense.
So you're, it's the question about domestic abuse within the asylum
system.
No,
I'm talking about people who come here and they've experienced domestic abuse, and they may be in houses of multiple occupation, and there's friction within the home, and there's no cognizance given to the fact that they've actually experienced the trauma of domestic abuse, and they're like, well, you've got a room, what more do you want, and they're just not taking any heed of what they've lived through.
So there is a policy within asylum support on domestic abuse when it occurs in MERS accommodation, and actually the policy is quite robust in that it says that if you are in MERS accommodation and you experience domestic abuse, you should be moved immediately. The Home Office does not need to be involved in that. MERS can move you and then seek approval after moving you from the Home Office. So on paper, it looks, like the response is effective. In reality, of course, we find that the victims, and of course are normally women, might be reluctant to come forward and report it. But if they did report it and policies were followed, there should be an effective response there. Now, there are a whole raft of issues then that that can become problematic, including if the woman has not made an asylum claim in her own right, you know, where she's dependent on the perpetrator's claim, she's in a vulnerable position there, as are migrant women of any visa holders. When they are dependents, they're in a position of vulnerability.
Okay. I have a few more questions, but I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to go to the Deputy Chair, Connie, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Niamh and Liz, for coming in. When we heard from the Executive Office there, I think Claire and Emma referenced this. You heard a lot of, oh, that's not for us, that's for the Home Office, oh, this isn't our job, and that can be very frustrating from a policy perspective. And something that I think was really concerning was you highlighted we're the only part of the UK without a strategic migration partnership. Can you maybe go into a bit more detail on the impact that's really having on the ground delivery of your services, but also how, without that, are you linking in with other areas, the Home Office? Are you learning from, are there other devolved nations, for example, that are doing this better than us and are delivering better services, and anything we can learn from and this committee could take forward?
Yeah, so on the issue of the strategic migration partnership, I think it would be interesting if the committee were to ask the department why they feel that it's not necessary when every other region obviously sees the value in it. Now, the department has assumed most of its functions, not all of them. And I think where we, you know, at the Law Centre have seen, if you like, the gap, if you like, with the move towards asylum dispersal and people moving outside of Belfast, there didn't seem to be much support for councils in having to very quickly get up to speed and get to grips with these issues that they'd never previously dealt with. And that would have been the job of the Strategic Migration Partnership, because they have this coordinating role. They are linked in with councils. I think that information piece could have happened a lot quicker had we had an ISMP. That's just my sense. Niamh, anything else?
Well, just to echo, you know, what Liz says, that the councils regionally are really, really working very, very hard to get up to speed on these issues. But you know, just this morning, I think Liz had a call from a council yesterday. I'm getting emails from people in council saying, please, can you come out and help us make sense of these new asylum processes? And you know, we are a small community voluntary organisation, and there's only so much capacity within our organisation to do that. I wish we had 10 more people, and we would go out and we would do that, and we'd make sure that people were getting the support that they deserved. But yeah, it feels like the councils don't have the support that they need to deliver the services that they've been tasked to.
Okay. No, I think, thank you. I think I would agree with that. I just know from my own constituency, there is a hotel that Mears has contracted, and it was very much the community groups had to come together themselves and discuss with one another what is the best way we can help and support these people coming into our community. There didn't really seem to be any structures, overarching structures, helping them and assisting them, because it was quite a new development. We'd never had a hotel open in our area, so maybe that's the kind of practical workings of how that partnership would work, and I think that's a really good question to follow up. Why do we not need that? And that'd be something I hope we could do. Thank you.
Okay. Sinead, please.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation so far. And I suppose maybe a regret from as a member of this this committee is that we didn't have yourself briefing first and listening to the stakeholders next, and then questioning the executive body lastly, because we could have put some of those questions to them, particularly around the strategic migration partnership, that, you know, the necessity in other devolved governments, and yet it's missing on the integration piece. And I suppose you give a fairly positive critique of the draft strategy. However, the indication that we're not bystanders in this, we're participants, and we do have our own vision and how we treat our new communities, and I think that is a piece that I would like to explore more with the Executive Office, and maybe we'll do something around that at the end of this committee meeting. But I get a sense from what your presentation was when you said, you know, it's very important to promote integration of all refugees, and there was an emphasis there. Can you expand a little bit more, because I get a sense that there's a hierarchy in relation to refugees, and we have seen some, you know, specific supports around our Syrian communities and our Ukrainian communities. And I know we are seeing some Palestinian refugees coming in now, but refugees are refugees, and they're not, you know, a homogenous group as once one of our previous members had said. But you know, there can't be a hierarchy either. And so just want you to speak to that a wee bit more, because essentially you have more to say on that.
Yes, well, thank you. So I do appreciate, we appreciate that the Executive Office is in a tricky position here, because of course immigration policy is made at Westminster, and immigration law by definition categorises people. You're a visa national or you're not. You know, you're this, this visa or that, and each one has different entitlements. And yet, then, so people do arrive with different entitlements, but the Executive Office, international human rights duties, place a duty on the Executive Office to try and eliminate racial inequalities. That's required in law, to eliminate and to promote opportunities, to promote equality of opportunity for all. So, you know, of course, that's a challenge, because people are starting at different points. So I think then the Executive Office really needs to kind of double down to show its commitment to others. And if you look at in this 18 months since this new division has been established, I mean, the Ukraine scheme was an amazing piece of work. But if you're not from Ukraine, you might ask, well, what have you delivered for me? Ola McStravick there mentioned this skills survey that was conducted. It was conducted for Ukrainian refugees. And the members of the Refugee and Asylum Forum wrote more than a year ago, well, it was a year ago, when it was first raised. And we wrote and queried, why has it only been targeted at Ukrainians? Mm-hmm. And we received a response in August to say it's being translated and it will be with you shortly. And we heard again today, it's still in development and hasn't come out. So I think I think the Executive Office does need to work harder to address this perception of unfairness. Mm-hmm. And another example of where it could do it is around NI Direct. If you look at NI Direct, the pages addressed to Ukrainian refugees are very good. It's very informative. But if you've fled here from Syria, from Sudan, from Somalia, there is nothing for you on NI Direct. And it is hard for us to comprehend how that could be the case.
I'm also very struck with the initial welcome payment to newly arrived Ukrainian people of £200, and it's not provided for others. I'm with you. That package was best practice. It was an example of best practice. It's not, we want to equal things downwards. Yes. It is about raising the welcome and the support on that level, that we got it right once.
Yep, and we can do it again.
And we can do it again.
And I should say that the draft integration strategy and those thematic delivery plans, they are full of activities that will benefit other refugees. So, I suppose our recommendation, as it has been for 19 years, is just publish this strategy, and then the commitment to all refugees will be evident, and we can start then to track. There'll be accountability of what has been offered and what is being delivered. But at the moment, it doesn't feel like a good space.
No, and I suppose I sat in the Executive Office in the last mandate as well, and this was imminent, it was arriving, it was coming along, and it never did. So,
just moving on, conscious of time. Claire, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation. You do a fantastic job. You train my staff on all of these issues, in particular this one, much better than any of the public services actually do, and I entirely agree with your point in relation to that. It seems to an extent that they woke up when the Ukrainian refugee issue happened, but these issues have been going as long as I have. I'm just looking around the committee. I think I'm the actually longest serving person on this committee. And you know, we were dealing with those issues with children from Syria and from other parts of you know, where they're fleeing from that situation. It was a point that I was going to make to the Executive Office, but I probably talked too much in my last questioning. But I suppose if maybe you would give your maybe opinion and assessment of the legal advice that's available to refugees and asylum seekers. Certainly from my experience, there isn't any. And I mean proper, informed, trained legal advice, and not necessarily from Law Centre or from other community involvement groups. I know there's a great resource down in Fermanagh, but I remember ringing them to get the advice, and they says we just don't have capacity. And I think the point I was trying to make, my last contribution, was around the impact on that young man had he been sent back to his home country. And you know, the social workers who were supposed to be working on his case just were not trained enough to do that. And provide the context and even understand the context in which to say why this isn't possible and why he needs to remain within the UK. And it was actually, I think it was Children's Law Centre, it might have been yourselves as well, who provided that context, and then he got that right to remain. So I suppose it's just to kind of give that legal advice, because they're talking about advice, but it's not the appropriate advice. But I'm sure it is in some respects, but it's not in terms of what's needed.
Yep, thank you. And we would say, I mean, of course we would say, we work at the Law Centre, but legal advice is crucial, because if you get status, it unlocks so many other entitlements. And there is a dearth of immigration advice. And there's certainly a dearth of immigration advice within the voluntary and community sector. Because immigration advice is regulated, you know, and you have to have a certain accreditation to be able to provide different types of advice, and asylum is all level 2. So that rules out a lot of the smaller independent, you know, frontline advice organisations. They don't have that level of accreditation. So that said, we were very pleased when the Executive Office has recently commissioned the Law Centre to provide this regional immigration advice service that we're doing jointly with Red Cross, and it's really to try and address initial legal needs of newly arrived asylum seekers. But what I would say is that this kind of work can't be done on a short funding cycle, and we would ask your assistance in ensuring that funding is committed to beyond this quarter that we're in. Because we need a budget certainty to recruit, to deliver this work. Niamh, do you want to say something about the absence of advice and how that's impacting on groups?
Yeah, it's kind of just to follow sort of what Liz said about it unlocking rights and entitlements. You know, we get calls from people saying, I can't get healthcare because of my immigration status one day. Then it's I can't get housing because of my immigration, or I can't get my family here because of my immigration status. So immigration legal advice weaves its way into every single aspect of a person's life. So while the Executive Office has all of these statutory responsibilities to make sure children have education and people have a home, for example, a lot of times that can't be achieved without legal advice. So the funding and the support for legal advice, as Liz said, on a more than short-term basis, these are the capacity within the immigration legal sector will take years to build up, because it's about experience, it's about accreditation, as Liz said. So we can't expect that the immigration legal sector can respond quickly when there's a crisis like Ukraine. We did. We pulled out all the stops to make sure that happened. But in order for there to be a strong and sustainable immigration legal sector so that people can access their rights, that needs properly funded and developed. And at the minute, we don't really know what's going to happen in the next few months.
Okay, thank you. Emma, please.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to you both. I suppose the point that was made by Sinead there, I think, is pertinent, and it sort of struck me. I think it's convention that the officials have to present first. I'm not sure, but I think it is telling that we've had now your own presentation, the presentation that's upcoming, and we had the conversation with the officials around the importance of lived experience in the strategy, and they've had the opportunity there today to listen to this, and none of them have stayed for that. I think that's regrettable, but I suppose the question that I asked them around whether or not the British Home Office are doing enough, I get the sense from your presentation, both in written form and what you've said thus far, is that they are not, and that it's not up to scratch.
Yep. I mean, the where to start, but the recent Rwanda legislation and the preceding Illegal Migration Act and the Nationality and Borders Act that came before it, these are 3 pieces of legislation in 2 years. And the UNHCR has been really clear that the Rwanda legislation violates international human rights law. So I guess this is what I'm talking about when I said that I don't think that TEO can be silent on these issues.
Yeah.
And if we have a look at, interestingly, I looked at, back in 2015, the racial equality strategy then, so almost 10 years old, that was actually clearer. It said that at times our regional interests will not coincide with those of Britain. And it went on to say that there was need for some sort of mechanism for change. So that was 10 years ago, and we seem to have lost that. And if we look at what's happening in Wales and Scotland, both of those devolved administrations are, have been much more vocal in saying, to the Home Office, to the UK government, that we oppose these legislative provisions that are, undermining the work that we're trying to do on refugee integration. So I think we need to see something similar here.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree with you. I think the points that have been made by everyone thus far, and the frustrations that we have with the system, how it's playing out, I mean, there's a lack of compassion, and I suppose that reference to the hierarchy, the disparity between different refugees, like, I'm sure we all have our own thoughts as to the motivation behind that, and I would have a very clear belief as to what that's grounded in. But I mean, we've seen that sort of replicated across the EU, where there was a blanket approach of compassion towards people fleeing the situation in Ukraine, and a year later we had an explosion of conflict in Gaza, and we haven't, we've seen genocide endorsed by the EU. So I mean, it's regrettable, and it would be, I suppose, positive if we could see some independent thinking in this jurisdiction that treated people better. But I mean, you are carrying the can somewhat on your own, and I know, like Claire, we've availed of your training and referred people through to you on numerous occasions, and only have positive things to say. So thanks very much. Thank you, Chair.
Maybe if I might just respond to in the aftermath of shortly following the Ukraine and the invasion in Ukraine, war in Ukraine, a ministerial authorisation was adopted at Westminster, which enabled, they made provision for Ukrainians who arrived in the UK who hadn't arrived at a port to get their immigration status regularised. So essentially what that meant is that a Ukrainian could leave, get on a Ryanair flight from Poland to Dublin, come north. In law, they are an unlawful entrant, but they were able, by dint of this ministerial authorisation, they were able to get their status regularised. And I think, again, which across the political spectrum, I think there is agreement
that we want people to be regularised. We want to have processes in places for people to become regularised, because when we have, and that ministerial authorisation has now fallen away, it doesn't exist anymore. And as a result, I am sure that there are Ukrainians who are working in very poor conditions, in particularly in the agri-food business now, but because they have no option to regularise their status, they are essentially trapped. So as a means to address the risk of exploitation, I think we need to push for more routes of regularisation.
Could I say one final thing, just to your point, Ms. Sharon? Obviously, Westminster, as Liz mentioned earlier, Westminster make decisions about who can access what visa, what nationality, so there's very little that we can do here. But whenever our local authorities are reinforcing some of those ideas about who is a deserving refugee and who maybe is less deserving, communities of non-Ukrainian refugees already feel that differentiation, and the action of treating the groups differently only serves to enforce that. And with the skills survey in particular, you know, we have established Syrian communities here who've been here through government schemes as well 6 and 7 years ago, crying out for employability programmes and schemes for them, and that still hasn't come yet. So that was a very difficult time in the community and voluntary sector, because, you know, while we were saying, yes, the Home Office might treat you differently, but locally you have the same rights, it turned out actually they didn't. So I think there's a job to be done there to make sure that everybody is welcomed on equal footing and recognises everybody's needs.
Okay,
Thank you.
Just time. Go ahead, Bram.
3 questions. You said there's 3 times as many people transitioning out of asylum seeker refugee scheme or system. If you could just speak a bit, explain that. You also mentioned about the new asylum process. Can you explain what has changed or what is the new process? And thirdly, just again, the person who's contacted me about his right to remain, leave to remain, is that the right way to say it? I was confusing myself earlier. But has lost his support services then, because he's no longer has refugee status. What is the best agency to support him if he's losing his accommodation? Who can I advise him to contact? You know?
Okay. Well, I'll take the first point, will I?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so the 3 times the number, actually overheard Orla say that earlier, so it was good to actually get a number. This is the number of people who were refugees and then have been granted leave to remain. So would they switch, the situation you've described, they switched from being asylum seekers into new entitlements. There's very, very limited funding available for that type of very specialist support. So this is a very critical time for newly granted refugees, because all of a sudden they're having to navigate universal credit, they're having to navigate the housing executive, they're having to navigate their work rights, having a bank account, being able to apply for a driving licence, all these new things. And if people don't get the right information within a very small window of time, as you've outlined, they could potentially find themselves at risk of homelessness. Now, Extern have been the organisation who've traditionally done that particular work, and that's mostly been focused in Belfast. But now we're seeing more refugees, more people becoming refugees outside of Belfast, and that specialism, that very quick intervention that supports people to go from being an asylum seeker to a refugee, they're overwhelmed. I think they have maybe 3, I'd happy to be corrected, I think they have 3 staff members are trying to do that work. So what we find is they're prioritising complex needs, and the people who don't have complex needs are finding themselves coming into your constituency offices then and saying, help, I don't know anything about these new services that I'm entitled to. So there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of misinformation out there about rights and entitlements, and a lot of panic really that could be avoided if rights and entitlements information was available. As a first point, as a second point, fund services, but even get it on NI Direct.
And with regards to who can help, we'd be very happy to speak to you about that particular client.
Okay, thank you.
With regards to the new processes, I think there has been this increase in number of people getting decisions which I think is to be welcomed. People can move on with their lives.
That they've just cleared a lot of the backlog.
Yes, it was clearing the backlog. But I think what's more of a concern is that a new backlog is now building, because since the Illegal Migration Act was adopted in March of last year, no decision has been made. So anyone who's arrived in the last year hasn't got a decision. So they're busy clearing one backlog, but another one is mounting.
Ladies, thank you so much. Really appreciate that. And again, thank you for your work and the support to us as elected representatives. It's totally wonderful and always very exactly what we're looking for.
Thank you.
Members, I'm going to pause the meeting for 5 minutes. Just let us stretch our legs, and then we'll have another panel coming up. So we'll resume at 10 past.
Committee Room 30. Sound. 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 Committee Room 30. Signed. Committee Room 30. Signed. Committee Room 30. Signed.
Thank you. Okay. Members, we're going to resume our session, and we've got our third briefing of the afternoon. And thank you for your indulgence while we sat through the first two, but hopefully we'll be just as engaged. Okay, members, so we have got Anne-Marie White from the British Red Cross, Barra from Annika Women's Collective, Imon Lant from the Northwest Migrants Forum, and Israel, unfortunately, is not able to make it, but Alexis Ekweme, from Belfast City Sanctuary, is going to represent instead. So, ladies, I'm not sure how you want to take this forward. If you just want to give maybe a bit of introduction each. Over to you.
From this end. So I'm Imon from Northwest Migrants Forum. I'm taking care of intercultural integration there as a part-time basis and volunteering there.
Okay, thank you.
So Anne-Marie White, I manage operations refugee support in Northern Ireland.
Okay, thank you.
Is that enough?
No, I was even if you want to speak a wee bit more about a few minutes just of.
Do you want to say anything more before I move
Do you want to say any more before you?
Okay. Maybe.
Just about your work.
Okay, so basically what I do is trying to integrate refugees and asylum seekers who are our service users to get into the local community when they moved from different areas of the Northern Ireland. A lot of people are sent to Derry very recently, basically from Portrush, Port Stewart and Belfast. So they are they present a lot of challenges to us. But my role is mostly to have them a space of sanctuary and to have a safe space for them when they are having a lot of things going through during the asylum process. And once they transition to the refugee status. So yeah, basically we are doing all social activities, collaborating with other organizations, also introducing them employability sort of things, because we found out that the employability is one of the things that our users are looking for. And there are a lot of challenges around that as well. Yeah, so we are working towards that. So it is just a start, but we are trying to help them integrate, because we also found that during the interviews, work is something that can integrate the refugees and asylum seekers into the local community faster and better, but they still need a lot of language skills and qualifications that will be fit into the local talent market needs. Yeah, that's we are figuring out. So based on the needs assessments, informal assessments, we are doing, providing the integration services.
Okay, thank you. Great.
So Red Cross, we're a regional service. We have about 15 people in our team. Over 6% have lived experience of migration and forced displacement, so multilingual, 9 languages, of which I speak only 1, but our team are very linguistic with lots of experience. So in our team, probably in each year, we'll look to support nearly 3,000 people, and of that will be about 15,000 actions. So it's a high volume of people that come through asking and looking for support. A lot of our work is co-produced with our own team and with our forums that we have of lived experience, which is really important for us. It helps to keep our services on point, and it helps us to review constantly, according to the funding as well, of course. So within our team, we have
people who are looking at orientation integration of newly arrived asylum seekers, lots of work in hotels, lots of work in dispersal areas, hence the more regional aspect of our work. We have Asylum Advice Project, which specifically was in Belfast, and that was funded by the Home Office dispersal funding, which is now really, we're closing that off because we haven't actually got any word on funding, which I'm sure you'll hear more about from all of us sitting around the table. But we are also working, as the Law Centre said, with a project looking at regional immigration. So we're looking at the unregulated side of that casework. We do quite a lot of complex casework, increasingly complex in terms of the changing in immigration rules, increasingly complex with the high number of withdrawals that are happening across the UK in the decisions that are made, increasingly complex in people moving around different parts of the UK, and also in terms of safeguarding vulnerability, survivors of trafficking and domestic abuse, which we're seeing a lot more of. We have a Ukraine casework element of our work, which was very specific with someone with lived experience looking to all the Ukraine casework. We have a particular team looking at refugee reunited families, and it's something that we don't see very much of in the refugee integration strategy, that there are more people that are being reunited in the UK than there are coming through resettlement programmes. So we're very keen that we would like to explore further in the global refugee figures that Northern Ireland actually submit a tariff now that we have ministers in place. In addition to that as well, the lack of support that reunited families have compared to other groups of refugees through resettlement. And we know what support can be afforded, but somebody who's reunited with families does not have that support. So that's quite a complex area. And unfortunately, we work with a lot of destitute asylum seekers, but on the plus side of that, we also distribute and administer the TEO Crisis Fund across the region with 11 other organisations. So that allows us to then really do a lot of casework and advocacy and evidence base around no recourse to public funds. That's lacking at the moment in terms of data. And we're very keen that the Executive Office fulfil their commitment to re-establish the no recourse to public funds reference group. That really helped to bring all the agencies around the table and fulfil part of the refugee integration strategy, which is looking at pathways out of destitution. So we're quite keen to really feed into that and support that with evidence and cases. We do quite a bit of work around integration and volunteering, and also advocacy and policy work. That is a nutshell of our service and the team that we have.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Alexis.
Hi everyone, my name is Alexis Kwame, and I am here to represent Belfast City of Sanctuary. So Belfast City of Sanctuary, basically just like the name it says, it's an organization set up to make sure that, we try to make everyone that comes to Northern Ireland, irrespective of wherever they come from, that they feel at home, that they actually find sanctuary here in Northern Ireland. So with that, we actually do reach out programs that will go into schools and so on. So we collaborate in that case, we collaborate with Education Authority and urban villages to go into schools and then communities to actually work together with these people. So when we go into there, because most of our team will be people from different countries, in our board we'll have people across like about 9 different countries. So what we normally would do, we'll go into schools and so on to talk to young people, because we believe in the program of catching them young. So because we believe that when these young people actually grasp these things and work with it, Belfast in the nearest future will be a place where, you don't look at someone and then just look at them because they are different color from you, or because they don't speak the same language with you, then for you to actually think they are lower or something else, So we have tried as much as possible over the years, because it started 2017, to do these outreaches. And from 2017, we had just one school. That was a school of sanctuary. That was Blythefield. But currently now we have about 64 schools, even including nursery schools that are schools of sanctuary. What we normally do in this case is that Education Authority trains people and as school assessors. And when they go into schools, they look at things that the schools have put in place to make sure that every child that comes into those schools, irrespective of where they come from, feel at home in those schools. So that's our Schools of Sanctuary program. And so far we've gotten about 64 schools, including College of Sanctuary, which is Belfast Metropolitan College. You can all agree with me that Belfast Metropolitan College is just like what do we call? We call it United Nations, because standing at the gate there and looking, you will actually agree that they've actually done a good work. So that's what we do. So that's the only school or the only college of sanctuary that we have at the moment. We are also working on other streams. So because all these things are all geared towards integration of these newcomers, for them to just feel at home too, that this is a place where they can actually stay. So that's what we do basically in a nutshell. But we also have other things, incorporated. But that's our basic work.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Araj.
Hi, my name is Arij Farah. I'm a refugee from Sudan, actually. Came to Northern Ireland in 2019, and I'm representing Anaka Women's Collective, which is a group of women, a collective of women, mainly refugee and asylum seeker background, from refugee backgrounds. And Anaka work especially among women, children, and young people in the refugee and asylum seeker communities. And Anaka is a collective of women that started in 2018 with a small group of women from the community. Started Anaka to just support each other, share their skills, and learn from each other. And from that time, Anaka now has like more than 300 members of women from the community, with a few funding, only 3 part-time employees, and more than 40 volunteer women doing the work. Anaka has now a drop-in day every Tuesday in Redeemer Center, one of the church in the town, where those women can come from 10 to 1. We do workshops, meet, have lunch together, and English conversation classes. We invite people to give information sessions for the community, do training, share their skills together. And from our work with in the community, actually, the main issues that facing those families and women, it's housing issues, education issues, which is they all related and they all interconnected. So housing, women's support, and employment support for those newly granted refugees. And one of my job actually is education project organizer. So we have homework club, evening homework club for asylum seeker and refugee children, with many of the volunteer teachers, and we provide like training support work with different places here. Like lately we did organize 2 training with People First in social care and in child care and classroom assistant for group of newly granted refugees. And one of our main campaigns now in education is the education equality, opportunities for education for 16 plus or 15 plus children who would come here and find out that they don't have places in school and they can't go to schools, and then even some of them they can't go to the colleges if they turn 16 before like after June. So many of them, we started this campaign with few of them, and now we have 15 between 16 and 15 to 24 that we work in this campaign to provide a better education opportunities for them, which is they have such programs in other part of UK. Glasgow have welcome back for new Scots program, which is 2 years, especially for this age group. They do 2 years, and then they would be able to progress in further education.
Okay, well, thank you so much. That was I'm sure, as you said, there's so much more
yes.
that you do.
Yes.
So thank you so much. I want to come to you, Anne-Marie, around the family reunification work that you do, and the whether that has been sped up in recent years and the impact it has on individuals being separated from their family. If you can sort of speak to where we are with that process. And
yes, so the refugee family reunification, there's a separate guidance document which has been changed to people seeking protection rather than a refugee of late. So it's kind of, we're thinking that pertains to people that may be granted some form of leave through the IMA. So generally people have been separated for a number of years. Somebody will leave their family in a safe place and travel to Northern Ireland, come through an asylum process, and on successful grant of leave to remain within that 5-year period, people are applying for family reunion visas. Thankfully in Northern Ireland everybody has opportunities of free legal aid, but we are seeing solicitors currently saying they're not taking on these cases because the legal aid isn't enough to cover the cost, to cover their time of applying for the visas, which is a bit disappointing because people are then trying to find money, and at the moment, because there's a lot of pressure on solicitors in terms of accessing for newly arrived asylum seekers streamlined questionnaires, it's proven problematic. If somebody is successful in getting their visa, there are opportunities through Red Cross, very limited, for some support with funding for travel, but that is for a small number of people, particularly for unaccompanied children or for somebody with medical needs. We're very limited. So people go into lots of debt to try to bring their family here. When people arrive, at the moment, there's a period of forced separation, so people arrive with high expectations of being reunited, as families should be. But currently within the housing executive, whereas before through the Syrian resettlement scheme, through the Afghan resettlement schemes, families are awarded homes out of country. So the government, the TEO, the agencies know that a family is arriving, they know what immigration status they have, pretty much the same way as somebody with a family reunion visa has been granted their visa out of country and they've got the right to enter. However, we cannot start an application for housing until that family are present in the country, which means when families are arriving, they're literally presenting to the housing executive from the airport with bags, and at the moment they're being housed in non-standard accommodation, which is generally in hotels with no access to cooking and no laundry. It's not the place that we want for families who have the trauma of separation to be living. That can continue for a number of months. This isn't a short, a few days fix. Some of the families are quite large as well, so the families that tend to be content to be together, but financially cannot afford. There's no address to apply for bank accounts, there's no address to apply for universal credit. So it leaves everybody in limbo, requiring acute casework support, and also reliance on the TEO crisis fund, which is limited in its fund as well. So in that respect, we're not providing any support for the families or any parity of support as we have for resettled families. In Wales, there is a particular funded programme by the Welsh Government for resettled families. It doesn't exist here. So we're constantly relying upon charitable funds. We're relying upon the crisis fund. We developed very good pathways with DFC, with NISA, in terms of application for universal credit and child benefit, pretty much the same as they were doing for resettled families. So we've managed to agree that, which is very welcomed. We have issues with HMRC, but that's not within this remit, of course. But so the difficulty is then, we've heard a little bit more around children's access to education, access to health. It's very difficult to apply for schools when somebody is in a hotel in a very temporary accommodation. Mm-hmm. If that extends to a number of months, you have children out of education for a number of months who've come from places of broken education already. So that's a real concern. And we're unable to apply for school places. There's no support from EA specifically, as you would have for children in hotels and asylum accommodation. There's no particular support given to access education. That will be our caseworkers contacting schools, making those applications, and not being as successful or responsive as you would have from somebody from EA in applying for those school places. In addition, it's very difficult if any additional educational needs are there, or any health needs, in accessing and registering with GPs with these temporary accommodations and delays in BRPs and such. So it's a very difficult situation, and one in which we feel it's very different to anybody arriving through resettlement. But both families have the right to be here. So we'd ask that there be consideration in the homelessness policy around housing and absentia, because that's what happens for people who are arriving through resettlement. The houses are procured, the houses are available and they're fit for purpose, rather than overcrowding or in hotels.
We'll pick that up. I'm conscious of the Home Office Dispersal Fund, and I'm not sure whether any of the other ladies are in receipt of it. And if you just give us a wee bit of an overview of how easy you find to navigate and whether it's enough, etc. So, is that, or any of you three in receipt?
Around what?
Yeah, go ahead.
Around what? I wanted to get what you said.
I'm talking about the Home Office Dispersal Fund in terms of any funding, or maybe even want to talk about the funding that you're in receipt of and any limitations.
Yes, it's not about talking about funding. Actually, I wanted to stress on funding thing. That was actually my proposal, what I wanted to present, because some of our organizations, because having worked with asylum seekers and refugees for the past 5-6 years now, we found out that there is a gap. Especially with the TEO 40-40-20, we found out that there is a gap because every other organization, most of us will have, among the blacks, among the people from everywhere, you have the Catholics, you have the Protestants, and you have others that do not have religion at all. But you find out that most times we've gone to TEO for funding, where we actually brought this up. What if you're a black person and you're a Catholic, or you're a black person, or even from any country at all that is not Northern Ireland, and you're a Catholic or a Protestant, where do you belong? But then you find out that you belong to the 20% and not the 40 or the 40. Right. So that 40-40-20 quota system is actually what I actually wrote about here. So maybe later when we have the opportunity, I'll have to actually read that out, because it's actually not working out. Yes, good and fine. It was lovely. It was good for the good relations time when 25 years ago when that was taken. But you find out that it has, because Belfast or Northern Ireland, as we know, has become multicultural. It has become more diverse. So it's no longer a Catholic Protestant thing. It's just for us to actually look at that, and that's what I have here. So
okay. Well, maybe you could leave that with us, and we can. No, but okay. I think that whole monitoring piece and the data piece, I think that's coming through today. I'm conscious of time. Do you want to go ahead, Deputy Chair?
Yeah, I'm something I'd picked up in the brief you'd provided around how that good relations is very much an outdated model of how it's aimed at the old model of two communities in Northern Ireland. And we know Northern Ireland's an ever growing, more diverse place, and those interventions are needed because unfortunately we are seeing spates of racist attacks across Northern Ireland and in parts of our city. So I think that we do need to take some targeted interventions there. Something else I'm interested in is the Ethnic Minority Development Fund from the Executive Office, if any of you are in receipt of that as well, and how that's working. I think the Law Centre had previously discussed that, and we'd had concerns raised with me and my constituency that was promised for 3 years, but they were then told it might drop off at the end of the year. So I think even more around security of the funding and any funding you get from the Executive Office and the security of that and how that could impact delivery on the services you provide.
As an ACA, we don't receive any such kind of fund actually, and our education project for now is funding for 2 years from Clifton House, Belfast Charitable Society, which will end by August, and we don't know if we would be able to continue the work we're doing or not.
We've never received as well, and we also have the education enhancement that we are doing in computer skills from Belfast City of Sanctuary. And initially it was from Belfast City Council that we got just a little port that we used. And currently CFNI just gave us just a little port that we're using. Yeah.
For us, it's not specifically for dispersing. We are having a crisis fund that when people really find it difficult to channel any source of income, because mostly asylum seekers do not have access to public fund. So, now during our interview, we also find that the average is 3 to 4 times every person through this asylum process have to move around the places. So within every transition, they really need different needs based on like from hotels to dispersed accommodation, where they didn't have kitchen, laundry services. Their own laundry and cooking facility to a place they need. So then they need facilities, kitchenwares kind of thing. So, and then there are more unique needs based on the family and where they are moving around, and based on the community they are referred to. So for that we are using the crisis fund for that. But there are more things that they are also finding during the movement, not just funding, but also culturally, especially in dairy. It's a very sensitive, you use like dairy and London dairy. Yeah, one of our interview, the one refugee said, like, I talked to dairy, London dairy, and I don't know which one to use, which one to address. Sometimes the other party feel bad when I use the word they are not looking for. So that is like something we think it should be from the top down. It would be good to have like what kind of cultural context that the refugees and asylum seekers should be aware of, because it's also help in the integration in the community. It's also help them to have a sense of belonging to the community. If they know like, should I address dairy or London dairy, or dairy first or London dairy first? Yeah, these kind of challenges in the dispersed areas.
I think that cultural context, that's a good phrase. Good phrase.
If I might speak to the resourcing and the funding just for a few moments, just in terms of the Home Office dispersal fundings,
Yes.
This was distributed through local councils, so every council area was given a set amount of money, and the RACID team spoke about the monitoring and evaluation. We're not quite sure of the outcomes-based accountability for that funding. We know that through other funding streams, TO MEDF, we have an outcomes-based accountability. We're all working to the same outcomes, these shared aims from racial equality strategy. We're not quite sure where the funding was distributed to, which council area are doing what. And I say this because it really helps if we're working regionally to know where the resources are, to know where services have been stood up, where we can refer people into, and how we can have some synergy between that funding. It feels very siloed at the moment, and we have asked, and we'd really welcome an overview of all the resources. The resources stop now, and as of the end of March, services are either continuing at risk or they're continuing through volunteer opportunities. That asylum dispersal money, and I included in my briefing paper the amount of people that alone in Belfast that asylum dispersal money through one project that we were running helped. It was over 1,000 inquiries just from people seeking asylum in Belfast. And the casework that came out of it was around vulnerability and safeguarding. So we really would like an update on where that asylum dispersal monies is sitting, and if that's still going to continue now we have the Illegal Migration Act. And we have asked out of TEO already, and they're not in a position to answer. But there's a lot of services, and as well as that dispersal money also was funding statutory services. Mm-hmm. We know that the Housing Executive Integration Team, who are really had that data sharing agreement with MEARS around people who are transitioning from MEARS accommodation into non-MEARS accommodation. That team, I believe, is funded partly, if not in all, by the dispersal monies. So other agencies receive these monies to stand up additional services. We don't know who received what, but very interesting to find out where that money was distributed and which services are now at risk of closure. And if not, how are they continuing with all the cuts that are happening? And to move on to the MEDF funding, yes, it was a 3-year cycle, but every year there's a letter that says that, and this year there's a letter which says we're only confirm 3 months funding until budgets are agreed. So we're continuing to work at risk as well, particularly if there is staffing involved, putting people at risk of redundancy towards that last month or two. So we're constantly moving and working at risk, and that really impacts losing people, particularly in lots of our work. It's people with lived experience who've been a great valuable asset in our team, who then need to work. So we can't expect people to move on. So the MEDF funding for 3 years is great for people if you have that 3-year funding. There's been so many changes in the last 3 years the organisations are standing up services, but they could not access that fund because it was locked in for 3 years. So we're fortunate that we had that 3-year funding, but I was very conscious of newer, smaller organisations that needed to access this to respond to the increase or the changing in the asylum intake or anything around the outcomes of the racial equality strategy that were unable to do so. So that's another consideration. There are no contingencies in either fund, which I think we'd all welcome that contingency to access that fund, as well as looking how robust it can be to respond to changes or crises that emerge.
That's a good point. Thank you. Ryan?
Okay, Chair. Just you mentioned earlier about education for children. So as you might know, I'm on the Board of Governors at Malvern Primary School. So and we have a bus service to some of the hotels in the city centre. So around 50, 60 asylum seeker refugee children attending the school, which has made the school viable and have 7 full classes, and been a very positive influence. And the enthusiasm for education, from those children has been very positive, So, and we've had events, intercultural fun days and so on, to promote the different cultures in the school. But that bus service is available. Originally, ZA was funding it. Now the school funds it itself. But you're maybe aware of that, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. We have in Anaka many of our volunteers and the women involved in Anaka. They have their children going to Malvern, and even now during the transition period, we find it hard to convince them, and they find it hard to convince their children to move other schools because they don't want to leave their schools actually. And many of them even I know we wouldn't have time even to talk about their cases. There is a child, autistic child with special needs. Malvern did a good effort to integrate him, and even with the help of Education Authority, they get him a classroom assistant, one-to-one teacher. He was so happy there, but now unfortunately this autistic child have been dispersed to outside of Belfast. Right. He's not going to school now for a month and a half, which has affected his situation. And as you know, for such children with special needs, the routine, the consistency of things, it means much for them. So there's different cases such as this children. Another one of our members also with autistic child now dispersed outside of Belfast, and they stopped going to school, and those 2 ladies very concerned about the well-being of their children and their safety and their education. And I know I wouldn't have time to talk about all their cases, but all of them, they just when they know about this meeting, they want us to mention their issues, their struggle with education and this dispersal accommodation. Some of them, they would try to register their children in the new places, but then it's not a temporary, even it's emergency accommodation in some of the hotels. Last week we have a family, they did take the kids to school there, but then they moved back to Belfast, and now they lost their places in Belfast, and now they try to get other schools in Belfast. And this has had big effect on those children, their mental health, their well-being, their stability, and this disruption, especially for children with special needs.
Right. Well, I wanted to ask another question, if that's okay, Chair. So, yes, certainly if families are rehoused within Belfast, we find they'll still travel to Malvern, which is good for us, even some coming some distance, because of the good experience there, and the school has put a lot of effort into that, I wanted to ask about employment law. I could have asked this about any of the agencies. So, when people have the right to work, and do they have the right to volunteer, or are they not allowed to volunteer in certain statuses?
They have the right to volunteer.
Because just in terms of having a place in society, contributing to society, being valued and doing something of value in society, if you can explain a bit about how that operates.
I can.
Because I understand that at certain stages people can't work at all.
Yes, if you're for asylum seekers, for Belfast, it's just until recently that some, depending on the field, you are now allowed to work. So some of them actually went into health services to work. But as an asylum seeker in Northern Ireland, you're not allowed to work. So most times those people now use those opportunities, for those that are wise actually, to actually go into an organization to volunteer. So they use their skills and they use, they gain knowledge, and they also give the knowledge that they have in those organizations, and it also helps their mental health as well, because sitting at home from morning till night just waiting for your 40 points to come, in a week, I don't know what that does to someone's mental health. So, but even for some of them, when they actually gain the refugee status and they are allowed to work, some of them still, because of the tie they already have with those organizations, they still make out time to volunteer. I am a life witness, so that I'm talking from experience, so you still have that tie, and so you still, even when you're working, you still make out time to still volunteer, maybe because of how it is. So volunteering is volunteering. It's your time, but you're the one to now decide whether you want to volunteer or not. But as an asylum seeker here in Northern Ireland, you are not allowed to work. But as a refugee, you're now expected actually to go and work. And now based on how many hours you're doing in a week, if you still have time, you can now decide to volunteer and give your time as well.
Yeah, can I add something to this? Because actually it's one of the areas that they want me to talk about, which is they want to ask questions. What kind of training for employment and the support that the government would offer us? Because many of them, they're keen to work, they want to work, but there is not much support in employability thing. During the asylum system, if you stayed in the asylum system for a full year, then you can apply for permission from the Home Office. Some of them, they would get this permission, but even they wouldn't get any
To what, sir?
to work.
After a year as an asylum seeker?
Yes, if you stayed, it's very limited conditions. If you stayed for 1 year in the asylum system, and if you are the main applicant. So like we have families with young adults, they want to work, but they're not allowed. So only the main applicant can apply for this permission to work. So many of them, they would be in the asylum system for longer, and even it's not clear. Sometimes they would apply for it and they wouldn't get it. Some of them, they got it, but they couldn't find jobs because they couldn't find a language support. They don't know where to go to ask for support to get jobs, because some of them, they would apply but they wouldn't get any response for this. So they always asking why the government here doesn't have an employment support programs, kind of training, kind of connecting us with the employers, encourage them to offer jobs for those people, kind of training at job. They always heard about in hospitality, there is a great need. In social care, I started as a social care worker, and I know the need in there. I can look at many of them, and I know the capability. And they want to do this, but how they can access this. We did organize a training in social care and child care and classroom assistant. 30 of them did it, only 2 of them got job after that, because they have a little higher level of English. They could go to the interviews, they got the support, but others, they don't have this. But with more training, with more employment support, with more effort from the government to connect them to employers, to build these training programs, many of them, they are young, they're willing to work, and they want to get the chances, but they need this support.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Emma, please.
I just add one clarity, just in terms of the right to work for asylum seekers. Yes. If someone's been here for a year without having a decision on their case, so if somebody has been refused or they've had an interview, it's only if you've been here for a year without any decision on your case. Yes. So I think that's important. Yes. And also, the only available work is from the short occupation list. Yes. One thing we really would seek some clarity, and we've tried from the Home Office, is if somebody does receive the right to work and they are successful in finding employment within that shortage list, how does that impact their asylum support? Yeah. Because currently there is no guidance on this. So it's very difficult to give advice when we're not quite sure on currently it seems it doesn't impact someone's asylum support in terms of their accommodation or their Aspen support. But we'd really seek some clarity. What we don't want is the Home Office to then ask people for money back, and then we're in a terrible situation. So we lack that clarity. I think it would help us all, wouldn't it, when people are coming into work and asking us for advice around who they need to inform, because there's lack of guidance at the moment.
Yeah.
I think, like the one I know, someone I know actually, the person is actually still being supported, but the person is working. So, but what somebody else said is just be keeping that money, because you don't know. They might actually ask you because you're already earning something. Because you're already earning something, they might actually ask for that money back. And that's what I think Anne-Marie just said, because there's no clarity. They're still giving him every week, they're still giving him the money they're expected to give him. He's still living in asylum accommodation. They're still filling the gas and the electricity is still being given by the government, but then the person is also still working, So that needs to be cleared, yeah.
Somebody can look into that. Emma, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to you all. And I suppose I had made the comment to the Law Centre around the fact that they're doing work on the ground, and the same obviously applies to you. So appreciate that, and appreciate you taking the time to come and speak to us about your experiences. I suppose I'd asked the question before about whether or not people felt that the British Home Office were doing enough here to ease the transition into the north for refugees, asylum seekers. My sense is, like even the example that you just referred to, that probably in your experience the answer to that would be no, if I'm correct there. Yeah,
Yes, would be no. From our experience in Anaka with the ladies, it's a good thing, and they would celebrate it first day, but they would always come with the fear of what would happen now, where we're gonna move, what I will do about the children and the school, and how to apply to benefits. And there is always a big gap between getting the Home Office support to stopped and to get the universal credit. And most of them, they would move to hotels where they don't have access to kitchen during this period where they can't provide for the children. They don't have access to kitchen. They don't have even money to buy ready food. They stopped going to school, and no one knows for how long this period would be. So it's changing this like a happy thing that happened to them. They're granted refugee status to a worried and very disruptive period of so what next?
If you could sum it up, what is the biggest challenge or the biggest problem that you come across in terms of the experience? What's the biggest pressure point?
So what we found on is one is the decision making time. At the moment it is 2 years is the average because of the backlog as well. Mm-hmm. So during that process, the asylum seekers are facing a lot of anxiety regarding the decision and also the reward scheme. That makes them really nervous because they don't know what will happen to them, even if even if they know this currently it's focusing on the boat, people coming by boat or the English Channel, but still they are also asylum seekers. For them it is the same, so they're very concerned, whatever they come from and however means they come they're very worried on this. And
have you found that since that has been in the media, that people's state of mind is worse and that their anxiety is worse? Yeah, it's worse. We are having inquiries what will happen to them, not just recently, but a few months back as well. There are questions what will happen, it will be enacted, or it will be legislated. These questions have been on and on. Yeah, that's one. Decision making is really something they really worry, because also the work employability things as well, because during that period you don't know when you will get the right to work will be granted. Even if you pass in some cases we found that even if you pass 12 months you still do not get the right to work. So that's really really challenging for you to start a new life. And also a lot of people are doing volunteering because they wish to do something
not dwelling in the home, but they are just, some people already doing volunteering, but this is also another challenge currently. Like if the places the organization they wish to volunteer for are very far and they can't afford to go there. So even for volunteering, not employment, which will pay you money, but even for volunteering, it is a challenge because you have no money to go, depending on your situation. Some people will have like travel card. Then during that period, they will be able to do, but some people do not get. So in that case, even if they wish to, they don't have that chance. Yeah, that is another thing. They are.
Okay, I can say something here. Yeah, I came into Northern Ireland 2013, and when we came into Northern Ireland 2013, I came with my children. I've got 5 kids. My oldest then was a boy. He's a boy. But he's no longer a boy anyway. He's a man now. He was 12, but he was the oldest, and then I had the other ones, the girls. Then 6 years down the line, we were on visa because my husband had come to do his PhD, but then somewhere along the line he fell sick and so many other things got in the way. So 6 years down the line, the only option I had was to seek asylum or either go or go home. And that was what I told them at the Home Office. I said, this was my last option. And so I took that. That was why I said I had, because then when we came, it was with a visa that clearly spelled no recourse to public funds. So I was working 7 days a week. I call that the hostile environment time. But I worked and worked. But we were practically working to just renew visa. That was what we were doing all through for the 6 years. And then that got in the way. And so at that point that I was going into asylum then, my son that was 12 had become a man. He just turned 18. And at that point I had to seek asylum. So I went into asylum system. And on the 7th year, based on the 7th years that the children have been here, they granted from the second one to the last one leave to remain and left him out. Up till today, he started year 8, year 9 here. He hasn't gotten his status. You're talking about 2 years. He will look at me and say, Mom, what next? He's 23 now, and he doesn't have his status yet. So those is the hopelessness. You look at him at times and he's like, you see a boy that was very vibrant, he turned into something else. So those are the things that you see. I have seen so many families like that. I have seen people, hopelessness, the children will, anxiety, the children will turn, a child that you saw that was going on the right path will suddenly turn. Because at that point, the person doesn't know. He's not allowed to work, he can't go to school. He went to Aquinas Grammar School. His friends went to uni. He actually gained admission into Queen's to do chemical engineering, but then they wanted him to pay £21,000, and he's not allowed to work. And I'm like, where do you get that from? Mm-hmm. And up till today, he's still here. So that's 10 years plus, and he's still in the system.
So, sorry, Chair, but see earlier when the lady from the department was saying that processing times have sped up.
I laughed. I know some people 6 years, I know some people 5 years, I know some people 4 years.
Yeah.
I know so many people like that.
Yeah.
They haven't gotten their status yet.
We have many of Anarchist members.
So many.
I think mine 8, 5. So, children born here actually.
Mm-hmm. So that's it, still here. So when they said it, I said, because I know friends, so many, 6 years, 5 years. Actually, sometimes I say that Sudanese and some countries, sometimes I say that actually, because some people will come to us. I also work with diverse youth, so I work with young people. You see some people that will come to you, and we are supporting these families, doing our best. And then 1 year down the line, 2 years, they will tell you, oh, we've gotten our status. I am happy for them. But then I look back and I said, it's a particular thing that we did, that some young families have not been granted their own, and then why some will come here 6 months. There are some that I know that never went to interview, but they got their status. So those will be the ones that the ladies were talking about. They didn't go, they stepped up theirs and they moved on. But for some, they have been here, they have gone for interviews and nothing has been heard. They are still there in the system and nothing has been done about their cases.
Okay, if I might just speak to that very briefly, I know we're coming to the end. Just in terms of the Home Office processes, we're talking about different processes within the Home Office. Talking about the legacy cases, talking about countries that were high grant rates that moved on to the streamlined asylum system. We're talking about Nationality and Borders Act. It's so complex to navigate, and part of the issue when you spoke about the Home Office and how we feel it operates in a very complex way. So navigating that system is very complex for organisations that do this day in daily. Navigating it for individuals and understanding why decisions weren't made on particular cases, why some countries have better grant rates, why some countries are streamlined, people get decisions on paper. It's all very complex. So even for organisations to understand. But in terms of the immigration rules and the process is constantly changing, we're getting updates from Rwanda daily, causes massive fear. We don't quite know what the Illegal Migration Act is going to look like operationally in Northern Ireland. We don't know what it will look like in terms of detention or in terms of the mapping that's undertaken in terms of the regional services. We know none of that. So everything we're stepping up now, is it still applicable? The audit that was done by the different departments in terms of access to services, we're still very keen to find out. Because if people can't access those services under IMA, where will people go? Who will support them? The Home Office had very brilliant comms before. They had a NIASAF Asylum Support Forum for policy issues. They also had lots of engagement around hotels, engagement around delivery of the contracts. That's all stopped. So we are now reliant upon the RACID team to be engaging with the Home Office. We would often be a critical friend and challenge and put practical operational questions directly to the Home Office. We're not quite sure if RACID have that function, whether they're just communicating back from the Home Office. So we have lost the ability to directly engage with the Home Office and raise concerns on policy, raise concerns operationally on immigration. And we're reliant upon RACID to do that. So that's a final around the Home Office. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, I just want to add something about your question.
Sorry, I have two more members to come in. Sorry, I need to move on. Sinead, please.
Okay. Thank you, and thank you for the work that you do. And I think that the charity and the community and voluntary sector really, have a burden put upon them in order to kind of support the communities, and they don't often feel very valued for doing that. And we talked about some of the funding around there, and just in some of the papers that we've received as well. I think Anne-Marie from the Red Cross, they indicated there was 357% increase in asylum intake between 2020 and 2023, and that's massive. But there's been no additional resource consistently provided in order to support the community and voluntary sector in delivery of services and that. So there really is a massive gap there, and I suppose I know the work that the Northwest Migrants Forum does in the Northwest, and it's just totally a valuable organisation, because it's so needed, and it's that lived experience and that understanding that is the important factor in it. Do you feel let down by the executive, the executive office being unable to have a strategy, for the past 20 years? Do you feel that, as a government, that we're allowing these gaps in funding and support to kind of grow? And your first question was really, really pertinent, because before we even started the meeting, we were having an informal conversation about how our society has changed, and peace and reconciliation is not green or orange anymore. It is a multicoloured, and yet the funding that is in the executive office is still going to TBUC, it's still going to urban villages, it's still going to tackling paramilitarism, and yet we have this massive integration issues and lack of funding for organisations that are doing really fabulous work on the ground, and as a society we couldn't do without them. They're core. So I just want an understanding from you how our work, our government work, reflects what you're experiencing. Are we too slow?
I would say yes. We need. There is lots to be done here. We don't see. we don't see this. I see in the community how they need more support with education. They need more like channel for communication. They need to support to integrate, to start working. And we don't see much, to be honest.
We just feel like for some of us that are actually working with diverse communities, like, people from diverse backgrounds, we feel to a large extent because originally these people are already marginalized, as we know. So, and the funding is not helping in any way, because when you have what we have noticed, it's good to collaborate and work with other organizations, but we've also noticed that the 40-40, you give 40 to some people who will tell you they're working with ethnic minorities or maybe themselves, or they will tell you they will actually deliver on so and so projects. So what they do to us is the last minute, if they can't actually do that, they now come maybe 2 or 3 months to go, 3 months down the line, they will now come to us. Oh, could you give us that part? It's just like ticking the boxes. They just come pick 4 people, and when they are videoing, they will make sure that their video rests on those 4 people so that you see, oh, we're actually working with ethnic minorities. But in fairness, if you actually go, they are not. So I just believe that there should be, a shift. They need to actually go back to that drawing board. I had some things, it's just that we didn't have time. Because those will be the proposals that we actually set up. It's just a few of them to actually recognize that it's no longer this, and the society is becoming more and more more vibrant, more diverse, and so it has to go with the time. It has to go with the changes that we're seeing in the community, because we don't want a situation where these people that already feel marginalized will actually rise in future to actually feel, feel neglected, feel this, and then they actually kick back in the same society where they are actually supposed to be, cushioned, or where they're meant to find solace or sanctuary.
Yeah, and Anaka also, regarding this, we always being offered projects and stuff to work with other organizations or any other bodies, and we start feeling they just tick their boxes. They just come and work with us, and then we decided whenever offer us projects or training or workshops, we would ask them to use the resources, the human resources we have, the skill of our ladies, because we have a big group of artists. So now whenever we start a project, we have to get the fund to allow those ladies to coordinate it. If it includes art, let them do the art workshops themselves and get paid for it, because many of them, they are refugees and they're allowed to work. So we try to do it this way, but we still in need of more resource and more use of their skills.
Thank you. Just conscious that Podrick who wants to come in.
Thanks, Chair. Just checking you can hear me okay?
I can hear you, I can't see you. Go ahead.
Is that working okay?
That's it now. Go ahead, Podrick.
Right. So, look, thank you very much for your presentation. I just wanted to build on an earlier question that I had asked to the department around healthcare, and that was around barriers. The specific barrier which I raised earlier was around translation services, but I'm very keen to hear, firstly, from yourselves on that point, but secondly, any other healthcare barriers that you've experienced, because one of the things that I have consistently heard in my constituency is around the fact that people are facing barriers to healthcare right across the board, but particularly as refugees and as asylum seekers. So I'm keen to hear from yourselves around the lived experience of that.
Yeah, I know someone that came here for his PhD, but because he has no recourse to public fund, so when he came, he was working, and so he was in, but then he fell sick and then went to the hospital, and then he was told he was meant to pay about 5,000-6,000, and so he ran, and then 6-7 months down the line he became sick, sicker, and then he came back, and by the time he came back it was noticed that it's cancer, and that it had spread. Today the young man is dead, leaving a wife and 4 children here in Northern Ireland. Recently there is a young lady, a mother of 1. She went to the hospital, and she was asked to go home. But in her folder, because she doesn't speak English, was actually, they actually, said that she has to be managed, but she wasn't told she had cancer. She didn't understand. And so she went home. Somebody else now noticed that and was like, did they actually explain this to you? That person had to take her back to the hospital to actually ask them, did you explain to her? Did you tell her that she had cancer? It wasn't explained. And so she didn't know anything about it. So I felt that in that situation where they knew that, okay, maybe this person doesn't speak English, was that need to bring someone that could understand her and pass the message on? Yes, but it wasn't done. Just like the young man I mentioned, a very young man with high hopes that came here. And then he ended up just because. But if maybe that wasn't there, there's no recourse to public fund, because I don't get it. Sometimes I'm like, we pay for, like when you're renewing your visa, you have to pay the health surcharges. So why is it that when the person now gets sick, the person is not treated then? Because I don't understand why you can pay for your health surcharges, and then when it gets to a point, you're not going to be treated for any ailment. So and so many others. There have been stories through ISCs. We've had so many stories of people that, and what these people feel is because of their color. That's the way they feel about it. And I don't know whether I would take that off from them and said, no, that wasn't, because sometimes you actually feel because there was need to do more and it wasn't done. So we felt that marginalization was there.
Yeah, we always see the same cases every day, like the ladies would come with the letters from GBs or doctor asking us to translate it for them, asking us to call to make an appointment for them. So our volunteers like taking their time to call GPs, call doctors, to make appointments for them. Sometimes they would be in the GB or in the hospital and they would tell them there is no translator, so they would call us to try to help them with the translation. Many times, like we do this, try to help them with the translation. One day, a lady with disabled child, she doesn't speak English. I've took her to the hospital because they didn't provide her taxi from Mears. And then when we arrived there, they told us, oh, we didn't book, we couldn't find an interpreter. So I went with them and I do the interpretation. But I told the doctors, I can't, I'm not a medical interpreter. I would try my best what I can understand from this situation. So yeah, always there is like this miscommunication between them and the health services.
Is there a second part of that, Patrick?
No, it was just more a comment, Chair, on that as well. I mean, I was quite shocked that the department had no awareness of that, because that's something that has consistently been raised in my constituency office. It's consistently been something I've heard that the Northwest Migrants Forum have experienced and their members have experienced as well. And to hear your experience today of that reinforces the fact that it is happening. So to be honest, it kind of sets alarm bells ringing for me as to how much are the department doing, or how much of the department not aware of, not doing. So it does raise concerns for me around that, to be perfectly honest. Because that is something that I've consistently heard. And I mean, like, translation services is only one element of accessing healthcare, as you've mentioned, in those two examples as well. So I'm concerned that if we can't get basic things like that right, then how are we understanding bigger issues? How are we understanding a plethora of different issues as well? So it was just to, I suppose, check that point and to see if that was widespread. I'm keen to work with you more on that. So maybe once we're finished the meeting, maybe I'll get in touch via email or something, and we can maybe do a bit of work together on that and how we tackle that with the executive office as well.
Okay. Can I add on one more, not just translation, but in healthcare? So what we are seeing across the board, it's like the processing time to register when you move from one place to another, from hotel to dispersers to another place. That takes like 4 to 6 weeks minimum. That's really concerning if you have underlying medical conditions. If you're very healthy, it's not a big deal, but if you have some continuous medical support, it is really hard. And the HC2s, the certificates, I think awareness on this is still needed in terms of the refugee and asylum seeker community. Some of them know, but some of them still doesn't know where they can use this one. And the third is the dentist. Currently, I know all the UK, the dentists are very rare. But for representing the asylum seekers and refugee community, when they don't have access to work and public funds, it's really challenging to get treated on their own because they don't have money as well. And whenever we also trying to get dentist, we call dentist, which dentist will give an NHS patient, accept an NHS patient. It's just really, really difficult. We have to run through a long list of dentists, but rarely we get one to get an NHS patient to be accepted.
There's one underpinning thing that's missing out of all of the health access to health services. In Northern Ireland, the different health trusts do not share information. So one health trust, if someone moves out of a hotel, that won't be shared automatically to the next health trust. So therefore, they're losing track. Bearing in mind that some areas have screening for infectious diseases as well. So if someone's in the middle of a treatment, this would also help to ease the re-registration process potentially between health trusts as well. And if there was an agreement with BSO.
Okay, I'm just conscious that that's more a health issue than an executive office issue. But I think we covered a lot of ground there, and I really appreciate all your contributions. And if you have any written pieces or any information you didn't get covered, we'll be happy to take that from you.
Okay, so I have dear members of the
sorry, leave it with us. I'm conscious we as a committee, but we...
Okay, I should leave it with you.
Yeah.
All right, then, no problem. I'll leave
we have
that
a few
with
more
you.
pieces of
No problem, I'll do
business
that.
to deal with this
All
evening.
right.
But listen, ladies, thank you so much. Really
Thank
appreciate
you.
your time, and to our previous speakers as well. So thank you. Okay, members, we'll just try and skip through these last few pieces quite quickly here. So in the Forward Work Programme, you know that we were going to try and come back to the historical institutional abuse issue on the 22nd of May. So Bernardo's, we've written to the institutions, Bernardo's are willing to attend. One other institution has responded, but they're looking for a bit of clarity, a bit of back and forth. So I'm just wondering, should we delay that session until we can actually get them? Okay. So we will push that back, but we will allow the clerk and his team then to keep pushing for that, okay? But I think we may be not surprised. We'll probably get the redress board at the same meeting. Okay, members, in terms of correspondence, the letter from Queen's University around the medical, the donations of the bodies, I'm just seeking your agreement to actually forward that on to the individual who first raised that with us. Are we content? Okay. Yeah. Okay. In terms of the correspondence on page 40, there's a summary there, but also on page 126 of the table pack, there's a response from the Department of Justice on the number of HIA prosecutions, and just really seeking your agreement to write to the Public Prosecution Service on that. Okay, content. And if there's any other matters in relation to correspondence people want to raise? No? Okay, and then so the last thing would then just be to confirm that informal meeting with the Reckless Joint Committee on the implementation of the Good Friday Agreement has been confirmed for 1 p.m. on Thursday the 9th of May. I think that they'll have a good turnout, so if we can replicate that, I know it's not a committee day, but it's in the private dining room, so if people can make themselves available for that, that'd be very much appreciated. Okay, members, so date and time next meeting is next Wednesday at 2 p.m. in this room. Thank you. Okay.
Committee Room 30, Sound. Committee Room 30, Sound. Committee Room 30,